Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hi, welcome to the program. It's the Jeff Gerstmann Show. I'm Jeff Gerstmann. Joining me, Arthur Gies. How you doing, sir?
I'm so tired.
Yeah. That's well, you were in Los. I'm just gonna stop the music. We could let the music play and fade out, but like I'm just gonna stop it because it's too distracting.
It was I don't know, was more jarring the music or it stopping.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, fine. I think it just picks up where it left off.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm feeling very relaxed. This is
Good.
like part of my weekly routine.
Yeah, it's nice to, it's nice to have a tropical Tuesday morning, I find.
The little like gentle it's not a gentle outro, but it's like clean.
Yeah. It makes me feel good, which is why most of this stuff is in place. It's what? Okay. Apparently I had it set to loop. So I mean, we could just listen to it the whole show. It's like a New Jack match or something. From Wirecutter, Arthur is here. You came from the Consumer Electronics Show. What's the smartest toilet you saw?
I didn't see it, but I would be willing to bet somewhere there was a toilet robot.
There have to be.
Quote me, but
yeah,
there was robots for everything at CES this year.
Yeah. That's we talked a little bit about it last week because I was looking at like, it's funny because I was kind of talking shit about it was a Roomba with an arm on it that could pick up socks, and I was just like, I can't believe this stupid thing. And then like The Verge put it on like the best things we saw at CES, and I'm like, well, if this is the best thing you saw at CES, then I'm glad that I don't have to go anymore.
Yeah, that's a little more sort of like joyous about it than I felt. The thing was like there were multiple vacuums with robot arms. It was the year of the vacuum with the robot arm. And I've heard multiple people say that like socks are the bane of my robot vacuum's existence, especially if they have kids.
Sure.
And I got to see a demo of someone showing how well it worked by letting this robot pick up a sock and put it in a basket, and then they would take the sock out of the basket and throw it back on the floor, which was like strange Sisyphean robot hell.
Like you're just watching someone play fetch with it's the Aibo dream realized. Sony was just 20 years too early on the robot dog thing.
There were many robot dogs at this show also. There were like robot dogs and realistic robot dogs.
Sure. I mean, why not at this point? I miss the Aibo because the Aibo was at least fun. I remember the Vince Brody, one of the founders of GameSpot. When the second gen Aibos came out in like, I don't know, 2002 or whatever it was, he ended up getting one and he had it in the office and never ever did anything. It was like he messed with it for like 3 days and then it just kind of sat in a corner on the charger, and I was like, oh, poor dog, poor robot dog, doesn't get to do anything.
That was Metreon era Sony.
Yes, exactly. When back when it meant something. No, I don't know. But I think also he imported it because they weren't selling them in the US, and so it was expecting Japanese. And so it's just, it was like one of those things where it's like you import something and realize like, oh, this has not been tuned for the US market, and it's a nightmare to import unless you have very specific stuff going on. There's been fires here. I don't know what it's like in the rest of the country, but that's been a lot of my week has been like really appreciating this Watch Duty app that has been it's like a nonprofit, and they've been really on top of what's going on with fires, and so we're far enough away that it's not really the main fire is not a danger, but the weather conditions are such that it feels like one could break out at any time. So it's just been me getting jostled to attention by like a notification that says like, hey man, there's a new fire. And so like there's been like 2 new fires every day, and it makes me think like, oh, this must just be like this all the time, but no one's ever paying close enough attention. They're like, oh, hey, a car caught on fire, half a mile away from you, and you're like, oh god, this is it, here we go.
When did you move down there? Was it 2022?
No, it was, actually. So, yes, that sounds, no, I believe it was 2021.
like end of the year or something.
Yeah, kind of.
This seems like it's your first really bad Super Santa Ana fire season down there since you've moved.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And earlier in the year there was one that was like way closer to us than any of these have been, kind of outside of the winds or whatever. But it's funny, like we moved down here to only just discover two things. Everyone we talk to is like, "Hey, yeah, the winds weren't this bad before. It's getting way worse." And you're like, "Oh, that's good to know." And also, yeah, the mosquitoes weren't really like this until 2021, 2022, and now every summer it's like no one can go outside, and you're like, well, this is great. We really picked a great time to.
Well, because it started raining again.
Yeah. Yes, we got some more rains for sure, and well, not this year, but yeah, that's been my experience of being outdoors. It's nice to work in the home because then you can just go like 2 weeks without leaving the house, man. Really settle in.
Air filters going, I assume, because the smoke has got to be intense.
Stuff has not been blowing our way, so I've got my co-way over here kind of ready to go, but it hasn't really been too necessary. There's been a couple of days here and there where it's been bad for half a day or something, and then the wind will shift and it'll clear up and be mostly okay. But yeah, it's been kind of come and go on a lot of that stuff. But yeah, why don't we let's take a quick break here. We'll get back and I want to talk to you. You finished? You just finished the Veilguard last night, right?
I did, yeah, like 12:30.
Nice. All right, we'll talk about that. And I have been playing Infinity Nikki, so we've got
same game.
We've got much to discuss after this. Okay, so it's a new year, and you told yourself that this year it's going to be different. This is going to be the year that you become your own boss. This is going to be the year that you make it happen. This is going to be the year that you start selling things on the internet. But how do you do it? It's easy to retreat and go like, well, I don't know. This seems so complicated. But no, that aspect of this, making it happen for you has never been easier. Because right now, you could be using Shopify. That's right. It's 2025, and a new year means new opportunities. And for a lot of you out there, you've been thinking about one thing over the holidays, and that's starting your own business. But, I mean, a ton of questions. How do I get started? How do I come up with a name? How do I come up with all this stuff? Well, Shopify has the sales end of this covered. And the best time to start your new business is right now. Shopify makes it simple to kind of get your brand in there, open up for business, and start selling. They've got thousands of customizable templates with no coding or design skills required. All you really need to do is just kind of drag and drop stuff in there. You can write copy for the things that you're looking to sell, all that sort of stuff. They've got powerful social media tools that let you connect all of the channels up, and you can kind of create posts on those platforms that are shoppable to help you sell everywhere the people are at, whether they're scrolling through all these different platforms and everything. Shopify helps you be right there in the mix. And it's easy to manage this growing business. They can help with the details like shipping, taxes, payments, all from one very easy to use dashboard. It lets you focus on the important stuff like growing your business. And then you can, kind of check back at the dashboard and see how things are going. Are you going to regret it? What if someone beats you to the punch on these ideas? Don't kick yourself when you hear this again in a year because you didn't do anything now. With Shopify, your first sale is closer than you think. Established in 2025, has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Jeff. It's all lowercase. Shopify.com/Jeff. To start selling with Shopify today, go to shopify.com/Jeff. All right, we're back. The Veilguard. I have spent some time with it, but I maybe like the first 5 hours. I mean, how long? This thing is long, right?
I think I didn't quite 100% it, but came close in like 73 hours of in-game time. So it's not as long as Inquisition.
Yeah.
So it's got that going for it.
You think it's a better game than Inquisition?
I think I like it more than Inquisition. I think whether or not it's a better game depends on what you want. out of it.
Yeah.
Um, Inquisition was also all of the Dragon Age games are very indicative of the environment of development in which they were made. Like
Sure.
Dragon Age Origins, well, I guess we're gonna make Baldur's Gate, but 3D and overhead, and Dragon Age 2 was shit, we've got 18 months. And Dragon Age Inquisition was this is gonna be a cooperative strategy game, right? Nah.
I mean,
Um,
yeah.
and also it had like all the busy work stuff, like all the borderline sort of like mobile, like away game type stuff, like
Yeah.
the time-based stuff.
You see a lot of the kind of some of the same choices they made with Mass Effect in that era in Inquisition for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the Project $10 era. Um,
Yeah.
so, I think that the thing I like about this is that it's like it's fun moment to moment to play because the combat is like responsive and the shooting feels good.
Sure.
Um, and I don't generally have to micromanage my companion's gear and skills very often.
Yeah.
The upgrade tree is fine. It let me do what I wanted to, which was
Mhm.
to make an archer like I do in all of these games. Um, and I just really liked the character relationships. I think that the character relationships are really strong. I think that there are some major choices you get to make that don't just necessarily mean someone is dead or alive. It
Mhm.
just fundamentally changes the sort of path of their character.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes giving them what they want gets them to a place where they're not happy. And I think that that's kind of brave.
Mhm.
Um, it's also that is a game that as you get closer to the end, you start to realize that it is not fucking around and that actually maybe stuff is not going to be okay. And I think that that's kind of an about face for BioWare. I think BioWare has generally almost always succumbed to this idea that like if you play right, if you do it right, everything's going to be good.
Right. Yeah.
And I did everything right, and I was still super bummed close to the end.
Well, I mean, that's good. I mean, also indicative of the world in which it was made, I suppose.
Oh God.
But but yeah, that's. I mean, God, I think about because I don't. I'm a sucker. Like when it came to like stuff like Mass Effect or even just like games in general, just as a like morality thing, I can't bring myself to play the like negative path, the bad guy route, whatever you want to call it. um it never feels right to me as
Same.
like, because like, oh well, this is what video games are, I'm supposed to be doing this, and because this is what you do in video games, whatever it is, some deep seated thing just prevents me from doing it. And it's always like, oh well, if I went back and played again, maybe I would make different choices. And like even in those rare cases where I have time to go play something a second or third time, like I usually, it's like, variations on the same theme. So that's
Yeah.
cool to hear that they seem to like have found a way to maybe put a little bit more nuance into some of those things.
I think the thing that I appreciated is toward the end, it establishes that actually stuff is going to happen based on your decisions and how much work you did. And like every BioWare game kind of does that, but it kind of
Yeah.
does it moment to moment. And in this, I don't want to spoil very much of it because you're so early in it.
Yeah.
But like toward the end, the preparations you make and the decisions you make affect the way that certain things come together and the way that certain plans can happen. And instead of it being like you play for 5 minutes and you see like a 30-second clip of consequences, there are like 5 to 8 minute cutscenes
Hmm.
that unfold, like showing all these different sort of culminations of actions and decisions you've made happening. And because the game has established that actually it will kill someone,
Right.
I was just sitting there with my heart kind of in my throat going like, "Please, God, don't let this go south. Please don't
Yeah.
let this person die. Please don't let this happen. Please, like, let this work out." Um, and, I won't spoil whether or not it does, but I was fairly impressed, and, I was streaming it, and some of the people in my chat were talking about how BioWare's cinematics team really got to go off finally
Hmm.
in a game, and they really do get real ambitious with some of it. And you can see some of that stuff earlier in the game. Like the vistas in this game are pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and that sense of scale and and graphical prowess and style, I think, really comes together, especially in the end of the game.
That's yeah, that's great to hear. I don't know. Like it's you know, a lot of the stuff is lacked, you know, whether it was nuance or whatever. So to just have something that is a little more fearless, especially for a game that, like, by so many accounts, it just sounded so cursed for all the years that, you know, it either hadn't been announced at all, or when they finally did announce it and then didn't talk about it for a long time and the name change. It just really seems like a game that went through, if not like the ringer, then 2 or 3 different ringers over the course of its development. So it's kind of neat also to hear that they stuck some kind of landing, even if it wasn't the weird multiplayer thing that they thought this was going to be 7 years ago or whatever it was.
Right. It's kind of incredible that it didn't get canceled,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
And also, even though they like got the okay to change it, you know, we just last year we saw another example of a game that got like a delay and got some changes, but didn't fundamentally change what it was, and that was Suicide Squad. Like,
Yeah.
they took all the sort of like loot leveling and gear level stuff out of Suicide Squad to try to make it better, but it fundamentally was the same thing. And in
I mean,
this,
and that's the sort of game. I mean, it's funny because, like, the way Suicide Squad is designed, like, you almost need loot leveling or just something else to strive for to further grow those characters or feel like you're making some kind of mechanical progress, if not story progress. So it's, you know, if they just kind of strip out one of those things in a game that is fundamentally meant to be that kind of game, like, yeah, it's just one of the reasons why I think that game felt like lopsided on top of everything else. But man, that game, oof.
it just didn't have any juice. Like, when
Yeah,
they took out all the like the leveling stuff and the level gating stuff, they took out all the impetus to do anything.
yeah,
And I think the thing about this is that if you look at this game, if you squint, you can see where this game was almost very similar to that game.
hmm
Like,
wow,
the environments are clearly spaces where you were supposed to go back there multiple times to do runs, to do missions. The gear system is clearly influenced by that stuff. Like, so much about this game was clearly designed as like a session-based multiplayer action RPG. And the fact that it works as well as it does as a single player action RPG, um, that doesn't feel like it's dragging itself out, is
yeah,
kind of a testament to someone. I just really would be curious to be a fly on the wall when they made the call, like when someone's like, "This isn't gonna work," you
right.
know?
Yeah, like, was there enough of a bloodbath out there in the marketplace with something like, I'm trying to think the timing, like, would it have been like Avengers or something that they would have looked at and been like, dude, we've got to get away from this. It's going to kill us.
I think
Um,
I would guess probably like 2021 probably
yeah.
was about when it changed.
Okay. So that would have been, okay. There would have been a handful of examples they probably could have gone to at that
Yeah,
point.
I mean, the Avengers had tanked by
Yeah.
then. Destiny was struggling. Like,
Yeah.
when Activision not only decides they don't want to publish your stuff, but walks away from like an ownership share of your IP, that is like a flashing red light on a business model.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Phew. Yeah. It's impressive that they were able to, and, you know, and they can save all these great ideas for Anthem too.
yeah, I for one am very excited just as soon as they ship the sequel to Andromeda.
Right. I keep I was going through my closet because I, you know, it's warm here and I don't need as many jackets as I
Sure.
owned, and found all my Mass Effect jackets and stuff that I bought. It was stuff that they sold before Mass Effect 3 came out.
Hmm.
It was like in the run up to the release of that game. They're like, we've got hot new N7 tracksuits and stuff, and I'm like, ah, yes, this is finally right up my alley. One of my favorite game franchises. What could possibly go wrong with this? And then I became ashamed to wear them after Mass
Yeah.
Effect 3 came out. So I was like, I found all that stuff in the closet, was just like, yeah, maybe it's time to actually get rid of some of this stuff. And but as a result, I also completely I don't know if I'm blocking it out of my head. Two things. One, the very existence of Andromeda, and two, the idea that they're going to make another one of those things. Like, my mind refuses to latch on to any of that information as if it were real or ever going to happen or anything. Like, the idea that they're making a new Mass Effect still I don't know, like in some sick way, I'm going like it's too soon. They ruined it too much. Like but it's been
8
forever. So
years,
yeah,
not
I
enough
know.
time.
Not enough time to
Not enough
heal.
time.
You can give me
Yeah.
another 8 or 9, and maybe we can talk. But
Yeah,
ugh,
it's funny because I think the one of the interesting BioWare things about Dragon Age is that like you can pull in some stuff from previous games, like you can make an Inquisitor kind of like
right?
yours. Um and there are obviously characters in the previous games, but it doesn't need the other games information to make sense. And also there aren't a bunch of dangling plot things
Hmm.
setting it up for another game. Like it is set up to have a sequel if it gets one, but it's not
Yeah,
like this is only really going to pay off in the next two games.
right.
And whereas like Mass Effect Andromeda was very much this is the first in trilogy that got no denouement whatsoever. Like you're never going to find out anything about the secrets that were suggested in that game. And now like where does that leave Mass Effect 5? Like is
Well,
that going
it's
to be
yeah. I mean,
standalone? Is that going to be like part of a trilogy? Like can we be confident it will get more games?
I would assume that they would take anything they learned from Dragon Age, or anything that that they can pull in, conceptually at least, and say like, no, this needs to kind of be a standalone thing. We need to re-earn that trust or whatever, and try to make something that wraps up on its own. I mean, there's always like little things that they can lay out there that they could pick back up on in a sequel without it feeling like a massively dangling, like, oh, this is definitely like you're gonna find out what happened to these spider people in a couple of games. Like they don't need to. They need to be more subtle with any of that stuff. I think, because I think people will sniff out, like, if there's anything in that Mass Effect game that feels like it is the first game of a trilogy all over again. Which I can't imagine they're gonna just. It's not going to be the dark middle chapter of the Andromeda, trilogy. Though maybe you get like a codex entry or something that's like, I
There's
don't know,
got to
yeah,
be
we
some
sent people away, they all died or something. Who knows, whatever.
There's got to be some discussion of
Yeah,
Andromeda and Mass Effect 5. Like there must be, but
yeah,
what that looks like, I have no idea.
it'll be
Um,
DLC, like a gun. It'll be a gun editor in DLC where you can make them hold the guns backwards. That'll be the only reference to Andromeda in the whole thing.
I would be so happy if there's no DLC for this game. I'm so over massive story DLC for things.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm with you on that. That's why I only play games that are just going to get tiny DLCs for the rest of time, like Infinity Nikki.
Never ending supply of pretty dresses.
That's right. My daughter asks me about. She's 5, and she tells me that video games are her favorite thing, and she doesn't play a ton of them.
That's real
Um,
cute.
yeah, it's been a really interesting development over the past couple of months here, that she just wants to know about them, and she always asks the question, tell me about another video game that I don't know about. And and then I'm sitting there stumped, going like, well, I don't want to tell her, I'm not going to be like, well, in Call of Duty, I mean, they did a war crime here, but then, and so I've got to sit here and think about like, what's a game I can talk to her about. And so like my mind is just rotted out with 80s arcade games, and those are also simple enough for her to pick up and play. And so like, if asked, I think right now, if you asked her what's your favorite video game, she would say Burger Time, which is insane. uh like, I'm not trying to, like, because the thing I set out to do when parenting was like, I don't want to ever be the fucking weird old dude who was like trying to force my interests on kids the way people do with music. And I'm like, we're not putting kids in Pink Floyd t-shirts, like any of that sort of stuff. But this kind of just happened naturally in just kind of talking about mechanics in games with her. Like, she rolled out the other day, because she'll take all that and then she'll say, well, I like this game, and then she will invent a game in front of me, and it'll, she's always the star of it and all this other stuff. And the other day she's like, and you can pull ladders out of your pockets and you can climb up the ladders. And I had to stop her and be like, well, that's like a game called Karnov. And then suddenly I'm like instructing a 5-year-old about like, well, when Karnov can make ladders come, he's got curly shoes and he can breathe fire. And I'm, describing Karnov to a 5-year-old, and she's like,
Is
okay,
there
all
like
right.
a video game equivalent to Survivalist? Because I feel like when you're going down the Karnov rabbit hole with your 5-year-old, like we're not there yet, but
Yeah.
I can see it from here.
No, yeah. Yes, I know what you mean. And then
And I'm old because I know what it is.
right, exactly, yes. And there's no reason she would ever need to know about the mechanics of Karnov, but here we go. She brought it up. I mean, she brought up the idea of just kind of spawning ladders out of nowhere, and I'm like, well, I mean, that's all how, rotted out my brain is I didn't go to like Death Stranding or anything like that. It was Karnov. Yeah, no, you hit down on the button and he makes a big ladder appear, and then you climb up there and there's K's up there you can pick up for points. Anyway, all of that is a long-winded way to say she's very interested in video games. And in the middle of talking about, she was like, can you tell me about video games that have girls in them? And so I told her all about Chun-Li and some of this other stuff. And then just because I had it on the brain, I was like, well, there's this game Infinity Nikki, and you can, I think I hadn't played it at all yet. And I'm like, I think you just do dresses. I think you put on pretty dresses and you walk around, and we watched a trailer for it. And I was like, this kind of looks like a platformer with pretty dresses. And I'm sure the monetization is a nightmare, but now that I've showed it to her, clearly we're going to have to play it, and I'm going to have to like navigate that with her. And so we downloaded it and a few days ago, and she's been playing it here and there. And she's not really great with the right analog stick and kind of camera movement in a platformer. Sure. She's been playing games on the Switch and like doing weirdly okay at stuff like Mario versus Donkey Kong. And kind of 2D stuff, but like Odyssey she had a little bit more trouble with. But like she's finding, it's a game about finding stars and collecting them, and then also there's like a ton of flowers and animals to pet that you get resources from, and so you're getting all these crafting mats out of like petting dogs and picking up flowers and catching bugs and all of this. So she's just kind of running around doing that, and not necessarily completing quests or anything. Like after she goes to bed, I'll like complete a quest or two so that she's got a new outfit the next time she comes back or something. And it's been a really interesting way to play a game like that, because yesterday she finally found the menu that was full of dresses. And I was like, okay, they want real money for these, and we're not going to spend real money on this. And she said, oh, but I want to spend real money on this. And I'm like, I know you do. Believe me, I do as well. But we're
Infinity bucks for her birthday, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how, and I don't know if she's going to get like super attached to it or kind of bounce off it. She's not like obsessing over playing it every day or anything. It's kind of just been every couple of days she'll ask, and I'll let her play it for 20 minutes here and there. And so it hasn't quite sunk in to her bones yet that she needs to play Infinity Nikki. But yeah, I can't tell if I've made a horrendous mistake or not by showing her a free to play game of a gotcha game with dresses and all this other stuff that I was like, oh man, I did this one to myself, but that's where we're at.
Yeah. You may have made a terrible miscalculation.
Yeah, but she asked. She wanted to know more games that had had girls in them, and well, that's what came out of my mouth. That's what came out of my mouth. And then I got back into Warframe. I don't know. This has been an ongoing saga for the past month here. I hit, without spoiling it for people, though it is like, at this point, I think the information is like 7 years old or something. I got to a point in the story where they kind of pull back the veil on like, here's what's really going on, which my understanding is they now, because of the way they've bolted story onto Warframe over the years, there's now like 3 moments where they kind of go like, oh, by the way, here's another layer of insanity.
This was the first Shyamalan that they did.
Basically, yeah. Yes. Yeah. The first like, hey, check this out. Here's what's really happening. And I had already had it spoiled for me, so I kind of knew what I was going to be seeing and when roughly I was going to be seeing it. But I think for me the impressive thing is I got to a point where I understand how to make progress in that game from like a story perspective, and like how to move through the narrative portions of that game, as well as kind of unlock the additional zones where gameplay is happening and all of that. And like I get it now, and that's a weird place to be, of like, okay, I think I understand how Warframe works now. And in terms of like what they expect of you, and they've done a really good job over the years. I think better than Destiny in terms of like how they direct you towards those moments and how they try to push you in the direction of the actual kind of interesting story stuff. Whereas like my experience with Destiny, every time they roll out something new is you launch it, they have one mission they force you into that is the prologue for the thing that they added, and then they dump you right back on the map and you're like, well, I don't know what I really want to do next, and then I end up playing like 3-year-old content for 2 hours, make no progress on the new thing, and then don't play Destiny 2 for another year plus.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of struck by how aloof Destiny feels.
Yeah.
Like it's just not interested in whether or not you understand what's happening or what you're supposed to do. And that is, as the kids say, a vibe for sure. Like, and that
Yeah.
is very much a Bungie vibe.
And I think if you asked them, I think they would probably, whoever's, was there then and is still there now, I guess, they would tell you that like, oh, well, we added the quest log, we added this, like, they did big redesigns to the menus and like that portion of the experience that I think if you were locked in on Destiny already, it was like a decent quality of life improvement, but it doesn't do anything or doesn't do much in terms of like the lapsed player returning to the game. Here's what you should be doing, or here's what your friends are probably going to be doing, and so it would behoove you to play some of that same content. So instead it's just like there's 9 different things you could be doing now, I don't know, pick one, and I always pick the wrong one. Yeah. But also on the other side of some of the like the big gameplay reveal or the story reveal that I got to in Warframe, it actually started getting more difficult. Like some of the missions on the other end of that are now like, because I have just been cruising through this thing because I have 10 years of whatever Steam packs were sold on the Steam store just on that account. And so I have like all of these Warframes that I've never touched. And so I'm just like going through and trying to level all this stuff up. And it's been very easy to do so, to be like, here's a level 1 frame with nothing unlocked on it, and I can just pick whatever and go in and but on the other end of this, like now that I'm moving forward in kind of the next chunk of the story, now it's like, oh, this is higher level content, and now it's like, hey, I'm bringing this level 1 guy with a level 1 glaive and a level 1 gun into this next mission is a good way to just kind of get smoked in 20 seconds. And so I'm actually having to play the game now, which it was very, very easy up until this point. And so the progress has been slower, but it's still been interesting to kind of get into a little bit of build crafting and go like, oh, I'm messing up here, so I need to attach this to the Warframe. I need more bullets here. I need faster reload here, and start to really think about some of the ways you can customize that loadout. And I think part of it is because there's just not a lot of other stuff out right now, and so like Warframe is like a really good right now kind of game. I'll be curious to see how well it hangs in my life as other games start to ship. But for right now, it's been a really nice a really nice thing to return to and discover like, oh man, they've been writing all of these quaint little stories off to the side, and like not most of them are not like amazing, but it's still interesting to see them try to because it's this historical dig almost into like the last 10 years of Warframe, because you're playing content that was made
and
forever
free
ago.
to play action games as well.
Yes. And seeing all of that stuff on display and playing through it and going like, oh, this was a much smaller game a long time ago, and you see some of that smallness in some of these side quests and some of this like still relatively early game stuff, that it's not as gargantuan as the 1999 update and all the stuff they've added. And I can't think of very many games out there that have like that type of like, because Destiny, they will pull content out of the game
Exactly. Yeah. Which is, I think that's like one of the kind of the most interesting things about it is like, Warframe gets compared to Destiny, but Destiny, like, it demands a constant level of engagement that it seems like Warframe is okay being more chill about, that it's
Yeah.
okay to walk away and come back.
Yeah, I think that the Warframe doesn't do a great job of like. Well, now it would be a different story because now I've played enough of it to have a good sense of how the world works and how the progression seems to work. But before that, I would download Warframe once every 18 months or so and run a mission or two that's the exact same type of mission that's all over the game. There's definitely a lack of variety from through the kind of general mission types, because it's just like, here's one where you're extracting data, here's one where you're extracting a prisoner, here they're basically identical, here's one where you have to just kill 107 guys or something, and so you go through those like 5 or 6 mission types over and over again, and then occasionally uncover something that's like dramatically different, and that hits way harder because it is spread in all of these different directions and all of these different ways. And so when I finally got to the first thing that was like, here's a big open world area, and by the way, you have a hoverboard, and by the way, you can do tricks on the hoverboard, and by the way, we built a progression around you doing tricks on the hoverboard. You're like, oh wow, you guys really, this game really started to do well for you guys at some point, because you started putting trick systems and all of this other insane stuff in along the way.
But also, it's such a competitive market because it's not just like other action games that they're dealing with. They're dealing with like a global environment of competition,
Yeah.
And so like they're not a big enough game. Like they're successful, but they're not big enough that they can withstand trends. Like they can't
Right.
ignore the environment of games around them. And I think that Warframe is such like an interesting gaming cultural thing. It's like the city of Pompeii in a video game. You just see like layers of city on top of layers of city on top of layers of city.
Yeah.
But people, or I don't know, like the walled city or something. There's like people living at every layer, or you can go through every layer.
Yeah.
And there really aren't many games like that.
Yeah. And as I've been starting these missions that are, ostensibly, maybe like 8 or 9 years old, it'll still match me in with human players. Like you'll still find squads and stuff like that. So it's, yeah, I don't know. There's a whole lot of game in there that I have not seen and probably will never see. But like for right now, it's been really enjoyable, and it's been something that I think I actually understand now, which is almost scarier.
No, you know what this is? It's that this is the relationship you weren't grown up enough for. And then you went and dated the first descendant for like a
Yep.
year
Mm-hmm.
and learn more about yourself as like a partner, and now you're ready to commit.
Yes. Now I'm ready to take what I learned in my past relationship and come
You're
back.
You're a better player now, Jeff. You can like really invest yourself in it. You can be vulnerable with Warframe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just wish the Warframes were hotter. No. The first
Are
Ascent
they not? Well, nothing's as horny.
Well,
as
I don't know. So, some people would probably argue that they are. I'm sure, like it's
robot
the internet.
fuckers.
Yes, exactly. People that want to fuck a robot. But we'll get into CES in a minute.
Surprisingly little robot fucking that I saw at CES or saw.
I saw a picture
CES.
on Facebook, or a brief video on Facebook of longtime freelance reporter Mark Saltzman standing next to a weirdly lifelike robot, and
with a strangely slack mouth.
Yeah, well, so no, it like that is, but also that was the first thing I was looking at. It's just like, what are people supposed to do with this thing? And it took everything I had to not comment on it. Did you fuck the robot? But I withheld.
Instead, you shared it with several hundred of your closest friends.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yes. The first Descendant sounds like it's like losing players at like a massive clip, and
I'm not surprised because Marvel Rivals is right there out hornying it with characters that people recognize.
Yep. Yeah, I just saw that skin that everyone has been talking about last night and was just like, oh, okay, you're gonna do this then, huh? Okay.
It's canonically accurate-ish.
So, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Disney's not going to just approve whatever. You're going to have to pull it from something.
I think, when you partner with a Chinese studio and like you aggressively go after the Chinese market, which obviously Rivals wants to do, like I think that you make certain like acceptances about the kind of stuff you have to make, and China likes some boobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the thing they do care about. Turns out we found it.
I mean, America likes some boobs too, but we feel guiltier about it.
Yeah. See, this is all stuff I'm going to start. This is how I'm going to build my empire on Red Note. As TikTok gets banned and everyone is starting to move over to this new app, Red Note, this is the sort of talk. It's all going to be the Marvel Rivals ass discourse is going to be how I make my new millions.
God.
All right. Why don't we take one more break? We'll come back. We'll talk about your time with handheld gaming PCs in Las Vegas. And then we'll get into the news. What button do I have to hit? It's all different when I do this. Okay, there we go. All right. We'll be right back. Hey, are you trying to do something a little bit smarter with your money this year? Yeah, people make all these New Year's resolutions about like, I'm going to save this and I'm going to go do that. And, no one ever sticks to that stuff because, it takes work. But what if it didn't? What if some of this stuff could just kind of happen, I don't know, automatically? Well, on the money end of things, there's Acorns. And Acorns can lock in years and years of healthy money habits in just 5 minutes. That's right. You can open your account in just 5 minutes and start automatically saving and investing your money so that it has a chance to grow. And that's better than, I don't know, just letting it sit in an account and doing nothing, isn't it? You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. So, if you're like, hey man, I want to, let's get out there and gamble a little bit. If you're looking for, if you can handle some risk, you could go to that end of things. If you're like, no, I'm actually like looking to save for retirement. I'm looking to, kind of help kids go through college at some point, and I want to understand how all this works. They've got portfolios that fit that as well. And you don't need to be rich. This isn't something you need to come in with hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can start with just $5, your spare change, and get started with just a little bit. And, kind of get your feet wet in it and see how it all works. And you don't need a ton of time either. Like I said, you can create that account in just 5 minutes. And it doesn't. This stuff isn't impossible. It's been obfuscated so many different ways over the years. That it seems a lot more daunting than it actually is. And Acorns does the hard part for you, so you can give that money a chance to grow. And that's nice. You can kind of focus on doing other stuff, and not have to sit there and micromanage one more thing in your life that you're going to forget and mess up on and blah, 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 blah. Acorns kind of takes that part out for you so you can kind of get started and see how all this stuff works. Head on over to acorns.com/Jeff or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorn Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/Jeff. And we're back. So CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. We talked a little bit about it last week. I kind of, because they put out a bunch of specs and all of that. But you were there. I want to talk about the future of gaming handhelds probably first, because I feel like the run up to the show, I think people had a lot of expectations about like, oh, this is going to be the next big sector, expect to see a lot of movement here. And like, yeah, there were announcements, but none of this stuff really feels like it's going to be, I don't know. None of this stuff feels like it's really dramatically changing anything. What do you think about the old Z2 architecture and kind of where this stuff is headed?
So the Z2, the thing is that like they announced 3 Z2 processors.
Yeah. And one's like exclusive to a device, right?
Yes. So there's the Z2 Extreme, which is the thing that I think people listening to this will care about, that was not there. There's the Z2 and the Z2 Go. The Z2 Go is a little bit less powerful than a Z1 Extreme, which is what's in the Ally X and the Ally Extreme and the Legion Go. And I think the Z2 is about comparable to the Z1 Extreme. So the Lenovo stuff that was there is using the Z2 Go.
Yeah.
Hence the name. It was made explicitly for Lenovo by AMD in partnership with Lenovo. And just as an aside, when someone from Valve is saying there will be no Z2 Steam Deck, there was no Z1 Steam Deck. They used their own APU that was a predecessor to the Z1 and the Z1 Extreme. So just because there's no Z2 Steam Deck doesn't mean there's not a Steam Deck 2 coming with a custom AMD part. And they have obfuscated, let's say, about new hardware in the past, like with the Steam Deck OLED, for example.
Yes.
When they were real insistent there was not a new Steam Deck coming, and then everybody got a new Steam Deck. So the Legion Go is a small version of the Legion. And you know, the big deal here is that there's a Steam version and a Windows version.
Right.
And the Windows version has more RAM and more storage, and the Steam version has Steam. And did you use a Legion Go ever?
No, no. I ended up skipping on that. The ROG Ally burned me so bad, almost literally, that I stopped investing money in.
And you know,
other
for the
devices.
record, the Ally Extreme got a ton of updates and became an extremely competent handheld, and the Ally X is the best of the non-Steam handhelds by a significant margin.
So it's not heating up to such a degree that it is literally forcing the SD card out of the slot anymore.
No.
They fixed.
No.
Is Armory Crate good now? Is that?
It actually is pretty good.
What?
Yeah.
What? Okay.
I know.
All right. Wow. All right. Okay.
This is what I'm saying. Like, I know you've been hurt before.
Yeah.
But it's just like Warframe. Maybe it's time to go back.
Okay.
And you could probably also play Warframe on an Ally as well.
But I think anyway. I installed it on a Steam Deck. I haven't actually launched it yet. But
it must run, right? It's
verified.
Game. Yeah. So the thing about the Legion Go is that it had the world's worst fan that got extremely loud and was not efficient at all. So it got really hot and really high pitched and sucked. So it was horrible to use around any other human beings, basically.
Yeah.
And the Legion sort of app stuff was terrible. Like every handheld has like essentially 2 special buttons in addition to all the other controller shit that they have. They have the button that brings up the front end, like the sort of home screen where you navigate stuff, like the Crate app on the Ally stuff.
Yeah.
And there's an overlay button that brings up a bunch of performance things that you can use to tweak settings in game, like not on the Steam Deck, but on everything else. You can like tweak wattage, you can tweak screen brightness and all that other stuff. And both of those things were terrible on the Legion stuff. The front end took forever to load, and so did the overlay. Navigating the front end was super sluggish, a lot of latency. And with the overlay, they kept updating it and never made it clear. Like it was always just a mess. And from what I have seen with the Legion Go, like I spent about 15 minutes playing Halo Infinite on it, which actually ran pretty well.
Cool.
Because it's essentially a Z1 Extreme with a lot of RAM that's fast, and that turns out to be a really important thing for handhelds. Fast DDR5, and a lot of it is important for handhelds. And so all that stuff, it ran fairly well. It got pretty warm, but not too hot. But bringing up the overlay stuff sucked. Like it still sucked. Like there was still a lot of latency. There was still a lot of lag. The organization of the Legion stuff just wasn't very good, and that it's not out yet. So some stuff they could definitely improve.
Right.
But the Legion Go has been out for more than a year and has these problems. And so eventually I am confident that Lenovo will get it right, but it doesn't feel yet with their software like they have. And meanwhile, I also fiddled with the Steam version, and it's Steam Deck,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
except it's a little bit better than a Steam Deck spec wise.
Mhm.
And so, I we'll have to see what that means, what it looks like for performance and things like that. There's just other stuff with the Lenovo handhelds that I'm not thrilled about. They only support 2242 NVMe's,
Okay. Yeah.
unlike the Ally X supports 2280 NVMe's, for example,
Mhm.
and those are cheaper. And also, well, you can you can system restore Go's, but the process of system restoring a Legion Go is miserable. Like, it
Mm.
involves going to Lenovo's website, authenticating your serial number, getting
Oh,
a specific download, and having like a very narrow window to download that restoration thing. Yes, there are multiple cats in the background. Enjoy.
yeah.
Um, and also, I've seen multiple people talk about like dual booting like Bazzite or SteamOS and Windows. And my
Right.
understanding is that dual booting Windows and Linux is not a good time right now.
Well, I mean, yeah, you have people that are trying to do it on a Steam Deck and, having some success with it there, but it's just across the board that just feels
Yeah.
like. So I wonder if the would you end up being almost better off, and this is dumb to jump through all these hoops, but you buy the Windows version of it, which is shipping earlier, and then wait for their version of Steam OS that has all of the adaptations or whatever they need to make for the Go, and install that on the one that has even more RAM and more hard drive space.
I
Because that
guess.
that just felt like the weird spec choice, to like, oh, well, yeah, we have this Steam version, but also it's got half the RAM and it's only 512 gigs instead of a terabyte and stuff. And you're like, okay, are you going to offer a version of it that has no? Okay, well, it feels like for something that they've tried to bill as like this is an experiment, like they're hamstringing it in ways that may not matter for gameplay, but just from like a pure specs perspective, you look at it and go like, that's a little weird that it just isn't the same device.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, at that point, if you're thinking about that, I would probably just get an Ally Extreme and stick Bazzite on it,
Mm-hmm.
which like you can get an Ally Extreme for like 500 or 550 right now.
Right.
And those are very capable handhelds. And also, if you want to put Windows back on it, the Ally experience for reinstalling Windows is the most painless of any of the handhelds,
Mm.
because it just does it through the BIOS. Like, it downloads Windows through the
Oh,
BIOS and
sure. Right.
reinstalls it.
Yep.
I do not have 24H2 on any of my handhelds yet, so I can't speak to how they deal with that. But
Mm.
I don't know. I think that the Legion Go S Windows and Steam versions are both a sign that people are figuring it out. I also think that there is a little bit more uncertainty about when the Steam version of the Legion Go S is coming out, because
Right.
like nobody is actually giving a timeline for that. They have like suggested like a timeline, but like you're operating on Valve time.
Yeah, and the quotes out of Valve were like, "Oh yeah, we just started working with them, so there's
Exactly.
more work to do to
Yeah.
support the sensors and everything else." So like,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to say with The Verge it said like May, but even then,
That's optimistic in my opinion.
okay,
Especially if Valve is working on their own stuff.
right,
So, I will probably get a Legion Go S sometime soon and start to put it through its paces. But I think that the software stuff on Windows is the problem. For the Steam version, like everything seemed to run great.
hmm
Um, and so I think that that could be a viable option if for some reason you just don't want to buy a Steam Deck. It's
right,
more powerful than a Steam Deck. So I think that you will get a little bit more time out of it. Like, I'm reliably, like, the Ally Extreme is just smushing the Steam Deck on more modern games in my experience. And
hmm
not like the difference between 30 and 60, but the difference between 30 and variable refresh rate friendly territory.
right.
So, it could be worth checking out that way, but I won't know more until I get a chance to really benchmark those things.
Yeah.
Um,
And it
but
seemed like the other, I guess the other kind of handheld stuff was that gigantic. Was that Acer that had the?
yeah, so Acer and MSI both had new handhelds.
Okay. Yeah.
Acer had I keep Googling this because I forget it
It's the
every
something
time.
11.
The Acer Nitro Blaze 11, and they also had a 7-inch, an 8-inch.
I think they call it an 8, but
so
is it like a high 7? It's like a 7.9 or yeah. Anyway, yeah.
I'm just gonna leave that alone.
Yeah.
So everybody is saying that the Acer Nitro Blaze 11. I just said it and I barely remember it. That's how like forgettable the name of this thing is.
It just doesn't feel right coming out of it feels like a joke. It feels like something that like, yes, the Nitro Blaze, like everything about it feels
it's like a parody
someone making
energy
fun of. Yeah.
It's a parody energy drink can is
Yeah.
what it sounds like. And Acer makes some decent stuff, so I don't want to like write them off. But the thing about this is that the Nitro Blaze 11 is not a handheld. People are talking about it like it's a handheld. It is not a handheld. And I'm not just saying that because it's too big to hold in your hand. I'm saying that because it doesn't run an APU. Like every other handheld runs an APU. Like the Legion and the Ally and the Steam Deck all run AMD APUs. MSI uses an Intel APU. The Nitro Blaze 11 uses a discrete AMD CPU and a discrete AMD GPU.
It's basically like they took a laptop and took the fold out of it.
It is 100% a laptop.
Yeah.
Or a convertible,
sure,
if you will, without a keyboard. With performance that is about equal to a Z1 Extreme, but because it's a separate CPU and a separate GPU, that means that it's inherently less efficient. And also the battery, I think, is like 54 watt hours, which is not great.
Yeah.
Or less. It might be less. There's too many specs in my head.
Yeah, I was gonna say
there's
like,
so many specs in my head. But the thing about this thing is that even in the press photos that they have for it, like on its website, it doesn't show people holding it. It shows a kickstand on the back, which it has, which works great. And you pull the sides off of it like Joy-Con, and there's like a central rail that you mount them onto and play games that way. Or you can play 2-player games with it like a Switch. Like it's a gaming tablet that works kind of like a Switch.
Yeah, that was the vibe I got from just like looking at the product shots and just looking at that thing. It just seems like a monstrosity, but it just it feels like that they just felt they needed to have something in this space, but they didn't want to actually go through the process of making a real one. So they took something that they already knew about, which is, laptops.
Acer is a lot like MSI in that they are proving more and more nimble over time and trying to like pivot into new spaces and do cool stuff. And so, just because these things may not work out doesn't mean that they won't make one that's good at some point. And something else that I noticed when I was using this thing is that when I hit the overlay button on the Acers, it brought up the game bar, but it brought up a game bar that I had not seen before with like a ton of settings change stuff that is like way more granular, like and way more like an Ally or like a Steam Deck in the things that you could do in it.
Right.
And that makes me wonder if they are leaning more into like the Xbox game bar, like settings stuff with the Acer handhelds as a solution, which is more tightly integrated with Windows and should run faster than a lot of the overlays do.
Right. And that's stuff that, Microsoft, I think, has alluded to a few times. They were at the Lenovo event that their head of next generation was
Jason Ronald, right?
Jason Ronald, yeah. That he was there talking about, some of their plans for figuring out ways to make Windows more friendly to use on these sorts of devices and all of that. So yeah, I wonder if they had some kind of testing version of that stuff on there, because they've tested game bar updates before, but I feel like the Insider Ring game bar stuff has really been focused on like developers, like, hey, do you want to make new widgets for the overlay? Then you can install this version of it. Like the Insider stuff hasn't necessarily, like, I think the last gaming related Insider thing they had on Windows was like the compact view for the Xbox app, where they were trying to rebuild that into something that you could use with a controller, but even that didn't seem like it would be enough.
Yeah. And I think that this is on the list of things to get into later, so I won't dig much farther into it. But I did like, it looked like vaguely familiar, but it was so not game bar like that I actually scrolled through the different pages of it and got to the about, and it was absolutely the game bar. It was just a version that I think is not the version that is on my PC right now.
Right.
I don't think. I'm not 100%, so don't nobody report a goddamn story about it. But um it seems like they are working on that end to try to more fully integrate within like the gaming hooks that are in Windows that do work.
Mhm.
And also I think this is like a Copilot Plus PC. I think the Nitro Blaze 11 is like rated for enough tops to be a Copilot Plus PC.
Yikes. Ugh.
Um yeah, I guess that's the only reason I can think of why they would use that hardware configuration instead, but I don't know. It's a novelty. It was really hot. Like it got
Mm.
really, really, really hot on the
Yeah.
back.
I guess I'm not surprised to hear
Um,
that, but yeah.
it's just, these handhelds are just a design situation that everybody is kind of figuring out as they go along.
It's been
And
exciting to watch, like as this stuff iterates, and like it's just none of it, even the stuff coming out of CES, like none of this feels like it's ready for actual humans to use. It feels like
yeah.
it's all built for like, hey, you already know what a PC is, right? You already know how to fix a PC, right? Okay, then you can. This is for you.
Well,
It
good
all.
news if you don't know how to fix a PC, every accessory and component manufacturer was showing their AI assistants that hook into BIOS and UEFI to analyze the system and tell you what's wrong.
Great. Finally.
Um,
I mean, honestly, like my server, I have a server in the garage that every 3 or 4 days the network just completely drops on it, and it acts like that there is no internet there, and nothing in the event viewer gives me any hope of me figuring out what it is unless I just start replacing network adapters and messing with it that way. So there is the idea that I could unleash something that might stare at it for a while and go, hey, did you try this? That isn't just turn it off and back on again. There's probably something to that.
yeah. Some of the stuff is useful, like being able to look at the BIOS and say like, look, you're not using DOCP or
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Like your RAM is not configured properly. Your fan curve is set to 100% all the time, which is why your fan is loud all the
Yep.
time. But yeah, as far as the MSI stuff, I didn't get a chance to play a game with the MSI stuff. They're
Mm-hmm.
making big promises, but the wording on their stuff is about low wattage performance as opposed to high wattage performance.
Okay.
And that is where we start to see the differences in like the Steam Deck versus the Ally. Like the
Mm-hmm.
Steam Deck I think tops out at like 15, and the Ally is like 30 to 35 if it's plugged in.
Yeah.
Which is more watts, in case
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't clear. Which is also why it kicks the shit out of the battery.
Yeah.
But people are disappointed because they didn't get the Z2 Extreme handheld. Like we didn't see the Ally 2, for
Right.
example. But
Nothing that felt like a generational shift. It's more like, okay, we're going to deploy these resources a little differently, and
right.
this will be better on the battery. This will be worse on the battery. Like, I don't know that.
But if you look at calendars from previous years, like the Ally X was rumored like around March or April, and then
Mm-hmm.
people got briefed on it in May, and they officially announced it at Computex.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think like Lenovo had the Legion Go 2 there, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
It was a non-functional manufacturing sample that they didn't turn on. And that will supposedly use the Z2 Extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that we are looking at something closer to like May or June for those announcements, with like July, like late June, July releases, or
Mm-hmm.
later in the year for the Go 2, who knows.
Yeah.
So I think those things are coming. They're just not ready to show them yet.
Right.
And in part because there was a lot of gaming stuff at CES this year. Like there was obviously an elephant in the room, and it's tough to get oxygen for those conversations at CES.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So NVIDIA, is rasterization dead? Is it all going to be like hand waves and jingling keys and like do you think that like that's they all of the specs that they released seem very careful and seem very much built around the strengths of that new card, which are like, hey, we've rebuilt DLSS to be better. We're able to construct multiple frames out of 2 frames and do more there. Like, it just feels like a lot of them doubling down on the existing technologies they've come up with that are like impressive. Like, I don't mean to shit on them. I'm not a big frame generation fan because it's hit latency so hard in so many situations for me.
Same.
But and so that being the main thing that is new about this series of cards, along with a kind of lack of specs around just kind of pure apples to apples comparisons with the previous generation. That's why I ask that. Like, do you think that if you are a person who's not going to engage with a lot of the frame generation stuff, do you think that there's enough of a bump in this series of cards, or does it feel like that they're just kind of like trying to avoid that conversation?
Let me go to my notes. I did homework before this to try to not screw this up too badly. So I think rasterization, like, you can see what the rasterization difference is in those cards in the charts that they put.
Mhm.
Like, when you've got Far Cry 6 and a Plague
Yeah.
Tale next to each other, like, those are not frame gem games, and it's like between 15 and 20% uplift card to card. And, that's honestly generation on generation. That's not bad.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's worth paying, like, the prices. It's certainly not worth the price of the 5090 if you have
Yeah.
a 4090. It's not worth $20,000 or $2,000 for 20% performance. So I think for NVIDIA, rasterization, I don't know if rasterization is dead. I don't think it's their priority.
Yeah.
I think that it's important to look at Intel from the perspective of, like, their market position, and video games are not an important part of NVIDIA's market position. Like,
Yeah. It's a
it
pretty
is,
rapid shift there.
yeah,
But
it's like the 5090 is a gaming card, but it's also a Trojan horse for, like, AI development, and so is the 5080 to a degree. And everything else is just like their sort of like gimmies or their gifts to you, the gaming audience, to suggest that they continue to give a shit about video games.
right.
So
Because even when they say the 5070 is equivalent to a 4090,
it's horseshit.
even that seems like an insane comparison, because you look at it and go like, no, you're like, yeah, like, yes, if the game supports all of these features, then yes, you're seeing that level of performance. But it just the direct comparisons feel really weird.
So here's the thing, and I've been a frame gen skeptic slash naysayer since it was announced, because like, I'm super latency sensitive in games, and I think that you are too. And frame gen has previously been touted as a way to get frame rates up to make games look smoother
Yeah.
with like a minimal impact on latency. And to be totally honest, for me, like, I feel if it's like like a frame and a half or 2 frames, I feel it. Um, but I think that approaching things from that perspective, what the CES sort of suggested to me is approaching things from the perspective that frame rate is really only important for visual smoothness on a monitor, or latency is just not the case anymore.
Right.
Like, there are so many more things happening in games that is frame rate and temporally dependent than just responsiveness and smoothness of image. And in that case, more frames doesn't make it respond faster, but it can make it look a lot better. And I don't mean like the difference between a cinematic frame rate and a video game frame rate. I mean that increasingly there are games that look like they are resolving significantly more detail at higher frame rates.
Yeah.
And the demo that they gave that demonstrates this the most clearly is the Alan Wake demo, where it's a scene where Alan is sitting at the table in the cabin in like the sort of morning light, and there's this shiny wooden lacquered table in front of him, and it's got like ray tracing and path tracing and ray reconstruction in there, and none of the DLSS 4 stuff, like basically just multi-frame gen forced into it to increase the frame rate, and there's just exponentially more sort of fine detail apparent in that shot. And it's partly because like the more frames there are, the better ray reconstruction works and the less noisy it is and all this other stuff. And it's just like a cleaner image with more frames.
Right.
And so, and they showed a similar demo with Black Myth Wukong, which runs like hot trash on almost everything. And they showed a native 4K version of the game without any upscaling, and it was like on a 5090 it was like hitting about 30. And then they showed it with frame gen and stuff and running like comfortably at like 160 180, or sometimes it was like a 6x frame rate difference.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that it looked more smoothly running, it's that there are so many visual elements of that game that are temporally dependent that with more frames the game is essentially assembling itself into something that looks better.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of that is because of DLSS, because like the DLSS sort of algorithms and machine learning stuff is analyzing all those frames to create a better picture of the game.
Yeah.
And the asterisk around all this is like, that is a machine learning analysis tool creating what it thinks is a better looking version of the game.
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily 100% what the developers like intended for it to look like unless they're taking that stuff into account. And so
right, it seems like something more and more developers will have to do, like as we go down this road of like, this being where all of the power is nowadays. Like it almost becomes some reverse version of developers taking scan lines on CRTs into account when generating art and going like, okay, well the scan lines will smooth this out. It's like,
absolutely.
Okay, well DLSS is going to do this to our image, or and I wonder how much of that they can know in development and how much of it they won't realize until after they've trained the model on their game specifically and been like, okay, now we know what DLSS does to this type of image, and they have to go from there.
Like, I know that there's like a lot of skepticism around machine learning as presented as AI.
Yeah.
And that's valid because like when you look at stuff like ChatGPT and you're asking questions, you're asking it to synthesize an answer, which is basically it just predictive texting an answer.
Yeah.
Like that's more or less accurate. And the models, as much data and slop as they put out, they're just not, that's not what they're the best at.
Mm-hmm.
And what they are really good at is analysis, like in prediction of like static elements, like an image.
Right.
Like they can take an image and make it bigger. Like that's not hard for machine learning if it has enough sort of information in it. And so increasingly, it seems like NVIDIA is trying to put more and more tasks onto tensor cores away from just the raw raster stuff on its video cards to make games look better without stressing the raster stuff.
Right.
And I think that they're having some luck. Like a lot of this stuff like looked really impressive. I just didn't play a lot of this stuff. And, like I turned on, as an example, I turned on frame gen in Dragon Age while I was playing it. And I was like, the latency was a frame and a half more than what I was getting. And it still felt so much worse to play.
Yeah. And, in a world where they're going to, where they've tried asking players to play over a video stream with even crazier latency, I get why that someone would take a chance on that and go like, oh, well, the average person, because I bet the average person playing video games probably can't tell, or at the worst they'll go like, yeah, something about this feels off, but they won't put together exactly why it feels off.
Sure.
And it seems like something that they're very able to get away with a majority of players. And I think you'll have a lot of people who have played a lot of games for a lot of years who know what it's supposed to feel like, who will then go like, this now feels like mud. Compared to that stuff turned off. It gets scary, I guess, at a certain point, because you go like, okay, what are the knock-on effects of this? I think I've seen a lot of people, and I don't think this is accurate because I think everyone's just grasping at straws when they try to have the conversation about like profitability in games or where developers are spending their time or whatever. But you see this rise of this notion of like, oh, well, now developers are going to get away with even less optimization of their games because the GPU will just pick up the slack and everything's going to run worse than this, and they'll just generate the frames in the middle anyway. And like, I think it's like becoming like a valid fear, even if I think a lot of it is like super misplaced.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really anything to do with optimization. And in fact, like the other stuff that NVIDIA showed, the sort of like not now, but like in the future stuff, like they showed, is also trying to leverage machine learning stuff to kind of radically change the way that people render graphics and in a way that makes
Right.
sense. Like,
Yeah.
they talked about mega geometry, they talked about neural materials and neural texture compression.
Mega geometry is a really good term.
It is.
We're
And
done with
like,
geometry.
it's one of those, mega geometry is like kind of like, it does a lot of the same, or it has a lot of the same sort of ideas and roots and concepts as nanite. Do you understand
Yeah.
nanite?
Yeah.
Right. So like, for the people who are listening who don't know what nanite is, like video games traditionally, the farther away from something you are, the lower res or the lower sort of detail version of something you're going to see. And the way that they have traditionally done that is with different level of detail versions of things, like maybe 6 to 8 versions of something of different detail, many of which have to be stored in memory at the same time, which is not efficient. And also that's when you get level of detail pop in when you go from
like,
one
oh,
to another.
you took 2 steps forward and then this tree appeared, or rather like the model of this NPC turned from like 9 blocks into something that resembles an actual human.
Yeah. So nanite, like the idea of nanite is that it takes geometry, like all the triangles that something is made out of, and dynamically increases or decreases it depending on how far away from it you are and the resources available on your PC, so that it's always as perfect a version of something as it can show you. Which is all fine and good, but that's hard for ray tracing because like when someone is generating ray tracing data, they essentially need to use the CPU and GPU to figure out all the points on something that light could possibly bounce off of.
Yeah.
Which is a
If those
BVH.
points are changing in real time, that's
yeah. It's even harder when it's moving. And it generates like a thing called a BVH for every object like that and keeps it in RAM, and that takes a lot of fucking memory. And mega geometry is essentially changing it so that it can dynamically generate that information only insofar as it needs it at all times, and saving up all that RAM, and drastically increasing the amount of like ray tracing information that a frame could have at any second. And it's doing that through machine learning and analysis and pre-compute, basically.
Yeah.
So that is stuff that is based on machine learning, like much like DLSS is. And then like neural materials is basically taking like a bunch of shaders and figuring out all these different permutations of how they could possibly look and storing that in a format instead of storing shader on top of shader on top of shader, which takes up a ton of memory.
Yeah.
And neural texture compression is a thing where they just want to like compress and also load in fragments of textures based on machine learning and pre-compute and analysis of what a player could possibly see or what a game could possibly need, which would theoretically make a texture take up like 1/8 of the space.
Yeah.
And this is stuff that Microsoft wanted people to do with the Xbox Series consoles, like the shader, like the sampler feedback tool. Like it's supposed to load in pieces of textures. Nobody uses it because Xbox isn't the lead console.
Right.
But these are all tools that theoretically will use machine learning to help developers maximize what hardware can do without just brute force rastering past it.
Right.
And also has the side benefit of them not having to make bigger and bigger GPUs with like smaller and smaller processes with more and more power.
Yeah, it was funny to hear them him get out there and say like, we're beating Moore's law. We're doing, it's like, yeah. I mean, by the way you're measuring it now, sure.
Yeah. But there's just so much inefficiency in the way everything is done.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with making that stuff more efficient. I think that's a smart way. I mean, it's the way we have to go at this point. I think just in terms of what is technologically available, and in terms of how much people are willing. I mean, we're already beyond what people should be willing to spend for something like a GPU on some of this stuff. So it's I mean, it makes sense for some of the process to change and some of the process to leverage different technologies than just like we need a bigger block that can throw pixels on the screen.
But the problem is that like people have to build games with it.
Yeah.
And like you look at the Steam hardware survey and most people don't have computers that can do any of this shit or not do it well.
Right.
So, you know, there's a lot of talk of like the Series S holding development back, and there are certain things that are definitely a problem on the Series S. But like as far as like holding back a game innovation, it is much more like low PC spec user bases that
Yeah.
hold back design things, especially for single player games.
Yeah, I was surprised. I looked at the Steam survey for December last week, and I was surprised to see that a 30 series card was now the leading card by like less than a
Right.
tenth of a percent or something. But to see cards that new in the lead now, because it felt like it had been a 1060 forever.
Yeah.
And
you know, you want to take a grain of salt with the Steam hardware surveys because those are
sure.
almost assuredly more engaged, more enthusiast users, and
Right.
there are a lot of Steam accounts.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you know, like a lot of this is like the future, and that's
Mhm.
this is part of AMD's argument for their cards moving forward is that you are paying for a lot of stuff with NVIDIA that is like future potential that will never be used.
Right.
Um,
I've
you are
definitely felt that
essentially
way, like as a 4090 owner, even.
yeah,
It's been like, yeah, it's capable of a lot. Like, if this thing wasn't so good at rendering videos, I would feel a lot worse about the purchase. But being able to use it on that end is definitely
yeah.
been nice. But yeah, it's felt like that way for a while. That games aren't taking advantage of this stuff the way that it you hoped, or the way
Yeah.
it has in past generations. You get the new graphics card and you're like, oh my god, like that feeling feels just long gone now.
But because like NVIDIA has been so far ahead on things like DLSS, on like fuck ray tracing
Yeah.
performance, like DLSS is like basically NVIDIA's easiest like recommend.
Yeah.
Followed by like NVIDIA broadcast stuff is nice, and also
Mhm.
for me like the Twitch like broadcasting stuff like through
Right.
NVIDIA is extremely useful. Um, and those things combined with ray tracing have made it difficult not to recommend an NVIDIA GPU, and that has like really made it hard not to spend a lot of fucking money on a video card.
Right.
Um, but that is what AMD is hoping to combat with
Hmm.
the RDNA 4 cards that are coming soon. Um, I so you know, like Nvidia announced their prices, which is 2,000, 1,750, 500.
Yeah.
For the 5070, the 5070 Ti, the 5080, and the 5090. And you know, talking to people at AMD, they were very clear that like if Intel had not released the 580, like that
Mhm.
would not be the pricing of Nvidia's cards because
Huh.
Intel's product is so competitive at its price point and suggests how competitive Intel wants to be with the next tier up
Right.
that NVIDIA now has something to worry about. And I think AMD wants to be the other thing that NVIDIA has to worry about finally.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting that Intel, because you think about the Intel cards as like, well, I guess like that's it was surprising to see some of the reviews of the Battle Mage stuff hitting and be like, oh, actually, this is
Fantastic.
surprisingly competitive, like especially at the price point. Like that, maybe it lags behind in what like some DX11 stuff or something, but like that generally that it's going to be like a pretty kick-ass card for especially $250.
Yeah.
Like that's hard to beat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does AMD fit in the middle somewhere here where they try to outperform that but without having a $2,000 card, or are they just going to duke it out with Intel?
Um so the thing about AMD's cards is that they feel that their machine learning performance has
Mm,
just catapulted from where the last generation was.
yeah.
Um, so their ray tracing performance with the last gen of cards was like not that far behind the 40 series, but DLSS has always been the thing that has screwed AMD. Like
Right.
FSR is fine, but it is not
But it's not the same.
enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now they have a machine learning based upsampler that they're getting ready to debut, and they actually had it in their booth in The Venetian, and
Mm.
Digital Foundry did an analysis on it and thought that it looked really, really good.
Mm.
Like really good.
Huh.
And I asked like one of the AMD execs about the sort of PSSR situation that Sony's been dealing with, like whether or not AMD is paying attention to the growing pains that they're having
Right.
with PlayStation Super Spectral Resolution. I think that's right. I
That
think I
sounds
got it right.
that sounds right.
And it sounds like they feel like they have way more data
Mm.
to go on, and like way more sort of tools to sort of properly vet that stuff. And because FSR 3 is in so many games, they've already gotten like a ton of feedback and analysis on that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so now they have compute that they feel will be more than competitive with NVIDIA with their sort of machine learning capabilities on the
Mhm.
cards, and an upscaling solution that is almost or as good as DLSS in the ways that most players will use it.
Right.
And they already have fluid motion frames. Like they have their own like completely open, like work on anything fluid like
Right.
frame gen thing. Um so I think that they didn't announce timing or pricing of their cards because they are waiting for the 5070 and 5070 Ti to come out.
Mhm.
Um and there's been some early leaks about performance, and the performance seems strong even with non-complete drivers.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they put out something that performs between a 5070 and a 5080 for the price of a 5070, or a 5070 Ti and a 5080 for the price of 5070 Ti, like,
Right.
and their upscaling solution works, like that suddenly becomes a much, much more competitive product.
I mean,
Like,
especially like they seem like they're making a gaming card, whereas as
yes,
you said earlier, like Nvidia, the video game part of it just feels almost like a side
right,
business for them compared to how rapidly the AI stuff has grown for them. So
right. And to be clear, like AMD is also an AI
right.
company.
Yes. Yeah.
They're making a fortune on that stuff, but they are
Yes.
like in a huge part of NVIDIA's presentation, their keynote at CES was about like automotive and robotics
Mhm.
stuff, like about like moving compute out of computers and into the world.
Right.
And that's not, AMD's thing was like, here's all our processors, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, so, I think that AMD is going to focus on features that get people like better performance in the games they're playing this year.
Mhm.
I think that their hope is to just like smoke similarly priced Nvidia cards in games this year and next year,
Yeah.
without offering like the holy shit, look at the future kind of stuff that Nvidia is offering.
Right. Huh.
Like they're willing to basically let Nvidia be the ones that pilot out into the galaxy and stay here on Earth for now.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
I guess that makes sense. What do you think that means for the next generation of consoles? We're probably still a few years out, but decisions are, if not being made, then you have at least a lot of investigation happening both at Microsoft and at Sony. Like, do you think that this approach from AMD, assuming that everyone just kind of sticks with AMD, do you think that what do you think this means for like the next step there?
Uh, I mean, Sony is already has
Yeah.
PSSR, obviously. So that'll be a thing. I'm sure that everybody's going to look into machine learning like as a way to improve graphics. Like that's just the way that things are going.
Yeah.
Um, and Microsoft has done a couple of things with machine learning here and there. All joking aside, one of the sort of coolest things about the Copilot Plus PCs that run games is there is a machine learning based upscaler
Mhm.
on those PCs that looks really good.
Huh.
Um, that is independent of the GPU, So I think that they have been working on machine learning based upscaling for stuff for quite a while already.
Yeah, I know they had like something in some of their specs that was like agnostic when it came to hardware, that they were trying to build some sort of upscaler, or like that they were trying to build like an
Yeah.
upscaling API that was, like, hey, you just plug your stuff into it and it'll
So
go.
the thing about AMD's work here is that like FSR is completely open source
Right.
and like super easy to put into anything, which is why FSR is in as many games as DLSS,
Yeah.
because it does just work. whereas DLSS is harder to get working. The machine learning based upsampling that they're doing is also open, and that they are documenting it and letting people look at it, but it is tailored around their hardware,
Right.
like
Okay.
what their hardware does.
Yeah.
Because AMD's GPUs do not have a tensor core equivalent.
Mhm.
Like everything machine learning wise happening on those GPUs is happening on the CUs. Like they're using functions on the graphics stuff. So
Okay.
one thing that may suggest is like if you use like MLSS or whatever the hell, it could have a slightly worse performance hit on those cards than it would on an NVIDIA card. But
Right.
I assume that they would just like raw power their way through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like everybody's going to do upscaling. Machine learning is going to be in everything, and it's not like we're going to have an AI assistant talking to you kind of machine learning. Although I am sure,
right,
that there will be some of that in the next gen consoles. And
Cortana is back.
I don't know what the hell they're going to call it. I mean, does Cortana make sense as an Xbox thing if she's on PlayStation?
It makes sense if you think about like AI's ability to get things wrong as like Cortana being rampant after too many years out in the open, then sure, Cortana makes perfect sense, but only if she's lying to you.
I love all of the Halo stuff, but like if Halo is on PlayStation, then it doesn't really make sense to make it a flagship Xbox thing.
Sure,
that will be me getting mad at that for a second and moving on. There'll be like these, like the AI feature stuff. Like first of all, game logic probably works better on an NPU than it does on a CPU or a GPU. Like audio processing works better on an NPU than it does on a CPU or a GPU. Like there's all sorts of analytical math that works really well on AI specific hardware. In addition to, you know, certain kinds of like game AI and logic probably works better on an NPU. So they're all going to ship with AI hardware, like machine learning based hardware. Like they have basic machine learning based hardware now. They just don't use it very often.
Right. But it's stuff that, you know, will benefit games in meaningful ways, not just
if people,
hey buddy,
use it,
let me talk to you about, you know, hey, there's some new movies out there that you could, if people use it, I guess that's
like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox both have hardware features that would make games better that people just aren't using.
Right.
Because PC players can't all use them.
Yeah.
So, you know, like in some ways, like low PC spec is lowering all boats, you know. So until that stuff hits PC, until like there's like those paradigm shifts, which we're starting to see, like we saw some games this year, like Indiana Jones as an example of a game that was like fully next gen, like in its like graphics stuff. So we are starting to see it, but you know, it's not like I didn't see like a lot of talk about direct storage with Indiana Jones on PC. So like there's lots of stuff that these consoles can do that it just isn't being used. And so we're stuck with like this chicken and egg factor. And that used to be what exclusives were for.
Right. Yeah. It feels like even the first party Sony stuff isn't hitting that stuff as hard as maybe. Well, like Ratchet and Clank, I think is the last like game like that, and Spider-Man or still feel like the go-to PS5 games for like, look at how fast these hard drives are. They can really just throw this stuff on screen. Wow. And even in Ratchet's case, you kind of see through it a little bit. That always felt like a big missed opportunity. It feels like that, and some of the controller stuff. I mean, there's all the talk that Microsoft has adaptive trigger controllers in the works, or whatever controller update that they're working on that would at least achieve parity with PS5 there, if not go beyond it. And, you know, hopefully that would be something that, you know, developers would start taking advantage of those things more frequently than they are now. I say that as someone who's been using a DualSense Edge on PC for the past year and change. Like,
yeah, you've been edge pilled for a while.
Yeah, it's a hell of a controller. I got Jordan Midler. I bought a gray one. I bought the gray one off of him. He was able to get one through their UK allotment, and I'm
so mad I couldn't get the PS5 Pro.
It's frustrating, right? It's just like it's a really nice looking thing, but I bought a regular PS5 Pro, and well, I don't know, it runs Infinity Nikki really well.
Okay, well at least you played something on it.
Yeah,
I've had mine plugged in for going on 2 months, and have transferred stuff to it, and that's it.
Yeah, I installed a lot of stuff. I ran a couple of games the week of launch and was like, okay, yeah, sure, I guess.
It's a PlayStation.
And, yeah, and that's been about it. So, yeah, I don't know when or if that's ever gonna matter, especially considering all those games will have to run on a regular PS5.
Mm-hmm.
And so even their upsampling, up-res stuff is probably not going to be taken advantage of as well as it could be, because who has the time or the money to develop those sorts of features for subsets of install bases?
But if they could, like, there's a lot of tools that they could take advantage of on existing consoles that they're not yet.
Right.
And I don't know, it's just like a wait and see. But I don't know when the next console generation is going to start right now.
Yeah, that's kind of been because obviously, like, there's been all the like both Sony and Microsoft with their handheld talk, like kind of trying to get in on the act a little bit and be like, oh, these things seems like people want these in different configurations around the world. Like, maybe people bought a Switch for a reason, and then that combined with some of this handheld PC stuff, it's just a real interesting. Yeah, I would not have predicted that stuff was going to go this way if you would asked me like 3 or 4 years ago that we would be talking all about handhelds and everything.
The last time we talked, I think I said that, like, I don't expect the next consoles to, like, introduce games that wouldn't play on these consoles.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest, like, I feel more confident about that today than I did.
Well, I mean, like you were just saying, there are features on these consoles that aren't being taken advantage of. As a 4090 owner, I'm over here going like, yeah, I don't know, it's nice, but it doesn't feel like essential. Bang for the buck. It does. Yeah. No part of it feels essential. And Nvidia's whole announcement is like, hey, we've found ways to make the song and dance, up-res stuff work even better. So we don't necessarily
on Blackwell.
Right. Of course. Monitors and TVs. I feel like there's always like my interest in TVs at CES was typically around like, did LG announce something? And I know every year they announce the next TV, and it felt like for the longest time they were the only good OLED TV out there. But I don't know. It feels like that's definitely like changed up quite a bit. But what do you make of monitors and TVs? The kind of next set of announcements out there. Initially, when Nvidia was rolling out some of the details around like, oh, this is how we're going to get to 4K 240 because of all these new monitors that just got announced, like all of this is going to work in tandem to be the only way you will ever see those kind of frame rates at that resolution. Does it feel like that stuff is kind of, I don't know, not in lockstep, but
there were more higher, faster refresh rate monitors this year. Like the big thing that everybody was showing this year were 27-inch 4K monitors.
Okay. Yeah.
Because like the pixel density on that is just like perfect.
Yeah.
Like I would not leave my 32-inch monitor. Like I am 32-inch monitor pilled for life. Until I am 40-inch monitor pilled at some point, possibly. I can't imagine that, but life does things. So, there were some refreshes of 32-inch 4K panels. There was we are starting to see OLED panels trickle closer to the mainstream, like 32-inch 4K 60 or 120 hertz monitors for like $600 or $700.
Yeah,
which is like very competitive.
It's getting there, that's for sure.
There's also like mini LED stuff there for the first time that looked really good. Like really, really good black levels for the mini LED monitors, really good brightness, and for some of the OLEDs, the thing that I'm seeing, like, do you have an OLED monitor?
Yes, I'm sitting in front of two of them. I've got an OLED TV behind me, and then I've got the OLED monitor that I stopped using out in the garage.
What is your OLED care procedure? How have you adjusted your usage around having OLED monitors?
Sometimes when this Alienware kicks on and says, hey, we want to go and do the care thing, sometimes I don't interrupt it.
Oh,
occasionally, but usually it'll run that at night. when I power everything down. I have honestly not been doing a lot of OLED care for any of this stuff, and just been hoping for the best. 'Cause I think part of me just wants to see what happens when it goes wrong. You know, like I think there's a part of me that is just like, well, you know, if it goes wrong, I would like to tell people about that. Like, yes, you should actually do the OLED care thing. But so far, the only downside of this monitor is that you get that VRR flicker.
I've actually gotten a little bit of that on Dragon Age because they were at very low light scenes. I am both impressed with your chill and totally disgusted. Congratulations.
Yes, I'm going to take this monitor and throw it into the street when it stops working. Yeah, no, the reason I replaced the first OLED I bought because it had an issue where if too bright of a scene was displayed, the whole monitor would go dark and power off. So in a game with a bright, and this would happen in like Tekken 8 and a couple of other games I'd been playing, and I was just like, okay, like I've had this monitor too long. I don't know that they will RMA it. I don't know that they will replace it. And so I just and I need to fix this immediately. And so I probably would have gone with, oh God, was it the MSI? There was like there was a monitor that was definitely like rated better than this Alienware I ended up with, but the Alienware was in stock.
Yeah.
And so I just pulled the trigger on it.
That's another thing that we talked about with almost everybody there. Just the lack of panel availability last year was like the big story that it seems like now we are well past, thankfully. But yeah, I have the MSI 321 URX, so I have that one.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I have it set to turn off after 3 minutes. Like I use dark mode on everything. I try not to let stuff be static. I don't have like desktop wallpaper.
I've been a no desktop wallpaper. I guess okay. The one change I have made is that I put all the icon clutter, all of the junk I leave on my desktop at all times.
Non-OLED monitor.
Yes, I drag that over to a separate monitor. That is the one thing I'm doing.
Yeah. Like I'm looking at the monitor here. All of my icons are over here.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the annoying things about doing all that shit is that like Windows is not super good at bringing monitors back from standby. Like it does it, but especially if they turn on at different rates, like it can really fuck with stuff, and sometimes it just like leads to bad loops. And also it just takes too long to wake a monitor up. It's essentially turning it back on.
Yeah.
But what if when you were not sitting in front of your monitor for a couple of minutes, it dimmed itself and then went completely black without turning off, and then when you sat back down again, it turned back on?
That's I mean, that's an acceptable kind of middle ground. Or is it a sensor? Is it a camera? What is the
different companies are experimenting with different ways to do this? But the thing is that like almost everybody who's making an OLED monitor is experimenting with ways to do this. So they clearly acknowledge that there is a thing, like there is it is a problem that people have, like based on feedback. And like there's a new version of the 321 URX that's like white that has this. And I don't care about the white part, but it having like a proximity thing that would mean that my monitor doesn't turn off as often gave me some FOMO. It's the only thing that's given me FOMO about this goddamn monitor.
I have been in situations like, now that you mention it, like, so sometimes I will lock this machine and walk away from it, and the monitors will never turn off. And so the lock screen
drives me insane.
Will be on for like an hour and a half, and I'll walk back in and be like, what the fuck?
How dare you retains text?
I know, yeah.
Image.
This got worse. So I bought and I'm pointing at it even though you can't see it. I decided that I needed a teleprompter in my life.
Yeah.
Even though I have not read off a prompter in like 5 years or more. But I was like, you know, one of these days I'm gonna want to do that. And it was on sale. So I bought the Elgato teleprompter and then hooked it all up and realized like, oh right, it's a monitor. Windows sees it as a monitor. I can drag things over to it as if it were a monitor. It has to be in it is now my fourth monitor that is hooked up to this thing. It's the only one that's hooked up via USB, but it is still, you know, in the mix as a monitor. And as a result, I feel like everything now takes a little bit longer to come back from, like when the displays do shut off. That one is added like another 10 seconds to the process of it waking up and going like, okay, how many monitors are here? What the hell's going on? Windows 11 is so much better at multi-monitor stuff than 10 was.
So much better.
But even still, like there's still like, you're right, that this stuff does take too much time it is still a little strange, and sometimes it feels unpredictable. Like I haven't had it fail to wake up or whatever, but it's always just on the cusp of feeling weird.
Like, I'm not totally unsympathetic because we are clearly a giant edge case.
Yes. Yeah.
Like the edgiest of edge cases. I said edge a lot this podcast.
Mm.
But yeah, I would it's annoying and I would like for them to fix it.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're actively thinking about it.
Good.
Which is, I think in part it's because there are so many companies that are making monitors with essentially the same display. Like it's the same panel.
Right.
So everybody has to figure out a way to stand out, you know.
Yeah.
And for MSI, it's like, well, we're gonna make a great looking, cheap as fuck panel. Fuck you guys, $900. Whereas Asus is like, ours is more expensive. We've got all this stuff.
Yeah.
So you know, it's actually kind of an exciting time for PC monitors again right now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I don't know. I've been excited about them since OLEDs hit like a a decent price point with a decent refresh rate and stuff. Like this Alienware is a 360 hertz monitor, and that's just too much. It's stupid.
Yeah,
it's stupid. But and most games can't hit it. But I was initially looking for 240s, and then I saw like, oh well, now everyone's getting into 360s. I'm like, well, I guess I might as well fucking do that. That's an extra level of stupid for me to.
So something we saw in 2024 in a couple places that we saw much more this year are dual mode monitors that are 4K 240 and 1080p 480.
Right.
That just like switch. They basically like change the current running through the monitor and change them from one to the other. So that is a thing increasingly.
Yeah.
If you need to live that life. And now like HD or DisplayPort 2.1, I think, is designed for that. Okay. For like high resolution, high refresh rate. Unfortunately, the cable length is stuck at 1 meter at the moment, and they are not cheap cables.
I bet.
Like they are expensive cables. Yeah. To the point where multiple people were saying like, you know, for some of the models we're shipping like that are on the more budget end, we're shipping it without a DisplayPort 2.1 cable because it just adds too much to the cost.
Gross.
Yeah.
No, that's still exciting though. I don't know. Like I Switch flipped, and I think it was, I talked to you about capture hardware because I was in the process of like, well, I think I'm going to make the Switch, and it was the PS5 Pro that got me thinking about this. Like, I'm going to start capturing in 4K. I'm going to start uploading to YouTube in 4K. I'm going to start down that road, and I became like much more aware of like that type of resolution stuff. And now I'm like, oh, I need to re-rip all these Blu-rays, and I need to do, and it's very dumb.
Jesus Christ.
Very dumb. I'm using CPU power in the dumbest ways possible. About like, well, we've got to compress these AV1. We need this. I got to do it on the CPU because if I do it on the GPU, the file size won't be as efficient. It's a waste of time.
You just can't help chasing waterfalls, Jeff. I understand.
Yeah, it's real stupid. But I think between the this batch of announcements of new monitors and all this other stuff, like I started to wonder like, oh man, we finally hit the point where maybe performance on a 4K display is actually reaching something that I will feel comfortable with. And it seems like this is the year, between some of the new GPUs and then, the display technology kind of catching up around the edges of that.
For me, it was text clarity was the big one.
Yeah. And so I do have a 4K monitor up here as like a secondary, and because of the way Windows handles it, it's like getting these multiple monitors in a sensible, like the mouse moves between them in the correct way is actually impossible because I'm doing 150%, because it's just desktop on this 4K. So I have the text bigger than normal, and that makes it like there's still so much multi-monitor stuff that Windows could be
Windows likes left to right with like a little bit of offset. Windows hates up and down.
Yes. And so the 4K monitor is the one that's above it. And so like working the teleprompter and all this other stuff. And it's like, I have a maze that I have to move the mouse through of like, okay, go up to this monitor. And now I can go over to the teleprompter, but I can't go there from my main monitor because that's just a block. And It's very dumb. And then I have a monitor that is also turned vertically just to extra make it fucking insane. And yeah, I don't know, maybe not the smartest moves, but that's, I don't know. It's exciting to see all this stuff coming, even if the high end GPU part of it doesn't feel as exciting as maybe some of this other stuff.
I don't know that like performance is going to be exciting. I think this could be the year the competition gets exciting.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
And I honestly would prefer, we desperately need for stuff to be competitive in that market. Like look at processors. Like, you know, the world's best gaming processor is $480.
Yeah.
Like for something that's not just like a little better, but like solidly better than everything. I think that's, you know, that's a sign of competition. So, you know, also a big thing that people were showing were long monitors to fit inside of cases. Like multiple companies are doing those official style, not just like Chinese dropship style. Like Corsair has one that's a touchscreen.
Weird.
Yeah. I saw like 3 of them. So they're coming.
I don't even want a window in my case. I don't like let
it also has a magnetic stand, so you can just set it on your desk.
Okay. Now I'm in. No.
And it's a touchscreen. Got your attention.
Yeah, no.
Get your attention.
Nah, I mean, well, my initial thought was like, well, I mean, I guess if you made a new Stream Deck that was just a full-on touch screen instead of individual buttons, like maybe that would be useful as a kind of control panel sort of thing. And yeah, there's certain workflows that I'm involved in that, you know, would benefit from a bigger Stream Deck type device. But
I want you to send me a message when you buy one of them so that I know what I did.
Yeah. Okay. This is, yeah, you're creating problems here. Why don't we get into the news a little bit here? Nintendo Switch. Have you heard of this thing? It's like a handheld. It's like a Steam Deck
sex thing.
Yeah, it is. And you can hook it up to a TV. They're going to make another one of them, and the word on the street is that they may. I mean, as even though every other word on the street has been wrong for the past couple of years, there seems to be a solidifying word on the street about it being announced this week. What do you think?
First of all, the Switch Pro was real. God damn it. Second of all, the number of people that are simultaneously confirming it, I think is kind of like 4 outlets in very quick succession all jumped on board, which to me suggests that like people finally got information that they're like real confident in.
Yeah. And I look at it as like, it's very sensible to, you know, we knew that the announcement of this thing was going to come relatively soon into the year because they had said they were going to announce it this fiscal. And it makes sense to wait until the week after CES, after things have died down from whatever that batch of GPU announcements and everything else, for them to say like, okay, this is the lane we're going to choose because we don't think there will be a lot of other traffic in that window.
Yeah.
A lot of the reporting, I think VGC has been saying that, you know, that they've been hearing that is a 2-pronged announcement style, which I want to say the first Switch reveal was like, okay, we need to do our piece on the device itself, especially because no one had seen that at all at that point. And then a separate thing that was more about the software that was going to run on it. It seems like that is the word is leaning towards a similar rollout this time around, which I think makes sense.
Yeah. Concept, like telling people what it is, which is really important because the Switch is a much more mass market, like civilian console,
right,
than other stuff. So like you want that mass audience to understand what it is, a lesson that they learned from the Wii U very clearly.
Yeah. Yes. Especially in this scenario where the differences don't seem like they'll be that major this time around. There's been talk about optical sensors on the side of a Joy-Con leading to you leaving it on a table and using it like a mouse, which sure.
Or to the 3 Nintendo games that use it and then no one else ever will.
It's like you can use it in a specific mode in the new Splatoon and then no one ever touches it ever again. Great. And there's that other button on it. Yeah, I don't know. Like there's
So the button is apparently like a social button.
yeah.
Like I think it's what's been more or less confirmed by people data mining the Switch OS.
Uh-huh.
Um,
It's just it'll post to Twitter. You know, they looked at all the social networks out there and they're like, this is the one. Here we go. We've got a nice tweet button right here on the device.
Time is right for Nintendo's own social media service once again.
I mean, if they bring back Street Pass alongside it, I'm kind of down for whatever they do, but I doubt they'll do that. I don't know. I know you've been. I've seen you on Blue Sky, kind of talking about your thoughts on the kind of performance and what sort of performance we'll see out of this thing, and not that people will necessarily be disappointed, but more that people are working themselves into a frenzy about a device that like will certainly be more powerful than the initial Switch, but not something that's necessarily going to blow people away, right?
Okay, so the thing about a handheld, like people compare handheld stuff to console stuff, and you can't do that because consoles plug into the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And they can expect that much power at all times. Like, like I think the Series S is like 130 watts and the Series X is like 230 and the PlayStation 5 is 230. And so they are necessarily constricted by size because of heat and electricity and amount of power that can be delivered to generate, frequency. And, the physics are an asshole. And I think that the other thing, like I'm putting together like the pre-news posts that we're going to run on the site or whatever today. And one of the main questions that I think a lot of people have is like, what's the battery life going to be like? Because the battery life on the Switch has never been good.
Right.
Because the Switch has a 15 watt hour battery. Whereas the Steam Deck, for example, has a 40 watt hour battery. And as a part that is spec'd to run at 15 watts, you can expect if it's running maxed out to get about 2.5 hours battery. Like that, it generally translates that cleanly. Which isn't just the chipset, it's also the screen. Like the screen counts for wattage as well. And the rumors around the Switch 2's battery that I was digging into today are suggesting like a 20 watt hour battery. And also that Nintendo wants the Switch 2 to last a lot longer on that battery. And that to me suggests that undocked, the clock on that console will not necessarily be what people hope for. And like it's running ARM, it's a low power part. Like, so it is efficient, and it's not like a 1-to-1 translation of what like an x86 processor would get for the same amount of power, but it's not completely uncomparable. And so at a certain point, I think people need to set their expectations to like what this device with a small battery that Nintendo wants to last 3 to 4 hours on a charge when it launches is going to give them.
And also something they want to sell at a price that is, presumably less than, a lot of these, Steam Decks and a lot of these other devices have been coming in at much higher prices than I think Nintendo would 100%. Be willing to feel comfortable with.
And Nintendo like is able to negotiate for better manufacturing prices than I think like a lot of companies like Asus or Lenovo, for example.
Sure.
But they're still fighting for fab space with everybody else. Like they are through NVIDIA fighting for fabrication. And they got to put in the screen, which is bigger than the current Switch. It's apparently 8 inches. I will not be an OLED. I'm almost positive of that, because why would they sell that right away when they can make you buy it again in a few years?
God damn it.
Like you just have to look at it from Nintendo's perspective, which is what they've always done, which is like they are setting you up to want to buy a replacement and give it to your daughter.
Yes, exactly. Yes, who has been beating the Switch Lite to absolute shit. The fan on that thing sounds like it has got a full deck of playing cards in it.
That's what it's for.
Yeah,
that's fine.
But also, I think Nintendo on the software side, I think, like that is also another factor in terms of just like how they approach like Nintendo as a company, like how they tend to approach these sorts of problems and how they tend to approach their very nature has always been erring on the side of like, okay, well, this is, we're here for families. We really care about family. We really care about this. Like, in terms of just like the types of decisions they would never make the highest high tech decisions that they could be making because it doesn't fit with that profile at all. It doesn't fit with the style of software they tend to make and everything across the board. And so, yeah, I think it all adds up to something that'll, obviously it's going to be more powerful than the
Sure. Yeah.
original Switch, and I think there will be some impressive things around that. But I don't know. I wonder if it will be received differently amongst the kind of like core gaming audience because they will tend to compare it to whether it's the ROG Ally or just some of these other handheld devices that are out there. But those are so not mainstream that it's not like it's something that is going to impact the Switch 2's success
Yeah.
overall. It just means that people will go like, oh, I thought it was maybe going to be here, but it's actually more like here power wise.
I think that there are maybe a couple million people on Earth for whom that will be disappointing.
Yeah.
Like, and for the rest of the
And
population,
and they will probably, most of them will probably still get one anyway. It's not necessarily going to be a deal breaker.
Because it's the thing that plays Nintendo games.
Right.
So I'm not, my sort of speculation about what the Switch 2 will or won't be hardware wise isn't to say it's going to fail.
Yeah.
Like, because it's where you play Nintendo games. It's where you play multimedia juggernaut Nintendo's video games.
Yeah. And if anything, the decisions they're going to make are going to help them sell it at a price point that will make it more mainstream out of the gate and will probably help it be successful. Yeah. Not hamstring it. I mean, the hamstringing you won't see for another 5 years when you see some third party try to cram a PlayStation 5 game onto it and you go like, oh, this thing runs at 20 frames a second, or wow, this thing does it, and until someone tries to really stretch that hardware, and then you see like, oh, right, it was never built for this stuff in the first place. So of course it's going to struggle with games like that.
And developers have been getting more comfortable with ARM. And there are more and more tools to take like x86 and move it to ARM, and Apple is like leading the charge on a lot of that stuff. So the sort of ballpark that I'm seeing people say, like optimistically, I'm seeing people say like PS4 Pro. I'm like, that's pushing it a little bit.
Yeah,
I think because you look at like Capcom games on iPhone as an example, like Resident Evil 4 on iPhone, it runs a little worse than the PS4 version and looks a little worse than the PS4 version, and that is a $1,200 device.
Right.
And do I think that Nintendo will be able to optimize better because of lower system overhead? Yes. But do I think that it's like orders of magnitude more powerful than an iPhone 15? Probably not. Yeah. So I just think that people should set their expectations to get stuff that looks decent, like, and is certainly better than the Switch. But also, DLSS is not going to take a 720p image and make it look fucking amazing at 4K. It's just not. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
And it also takes system resources to do that. Like a lot, like progressively more and more system resources. DLSS is not free.
Yeah.
Especially on something with as small a die size as a handheld Nintendo console. And
limited battery life that they want to try to preserve as much as possible. They're not going to just, throw everything they got at it. Yeah, it'll be, I still maintain that I think that, and I think part of it is because this whole thing just seems so iterative instead of, I don't know, like
it's a Super Nintendo.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't feel like that they are like going to make something that is completely insane and you're going to go like, oh, this is changing gaming again. It's, hey, they're going to make another one of those things. And what was my point? I had one. I swear.
As someone who works around normal people, like that are like reasonably tech familiar, but like, there's like, like lots of people who just like work normal jobs, like lots of women, like they are more interested in this than any console I've ever seen. Like, I think that the amount you'll be able to gauge the appeal of this product by the mainstream coverage of it in a way that you can't with other video game stuff, like like on This Morning America and like NBC's show and all this other stuff. Like Fox News will talk about the Switch 2 and not to shit on it, probably. So, like it is, it is aimed at a mainstream audience, and I think Nintendo has just gotten a lot better at marketing their stuff to a mainstream audience than they were in the era of the Wii U or even the era of the Wii.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I think they've really come a long way on that stuff. And I think that what the thing that they're selling is something that I think people clearly want. I think that obviously, you look at the Switch numbers, and I think there was some reluctance early on in terms of just like this notion of, hey, it's a handheld that also docks to a TV. And you see the corners they had to cut to make that sort of thing a reality in terms of its power. But like, who cares? Like for as much as people complained about the frame rate in those Pokemon games, they sure sold just fine. And then you look at the stuff that is actually super well optimized. And granted, it's, because they're porting up from the previous generation. But like, you go and you look at something like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe.
72 million unit selling Mario Kart 8 Deluxe.
Yeah, you look at that and go like, this looks great by any standard. Like, I'm not looking at this and going like, where's the rough edges? Where's this, like, you look at it, it looks fantastic in the way that you want those games to look. And so I think a power bump there, even if it's maybe not the most exciting thing, I think for people that are watching this space like hawks every single day on message boards complaining about whatever, like, I don't think any of that matters. I think they'll launch this thing. I think they will do a Mario Kart 9, if not at launch, then year one. Because I feel like this Nintendo is a Nintendo that is very focused on making what they think are the smart, obvious moves, as opposed to always like surprising and delighting people at the expense of making a console that will sell the types of numbers that they just came off of.
They literally delayed the console a year to have games ready for it. So I assume, if nothing else, like the only thing I feel really confident in is, other than it not being as powerful as some people on the internet want it to be, is that like it will have a absolutely murderer's row of fucking launch games for the year. Like there will be a big game on this on the system like every 2 months. Especially if it comes out in May. But again, like, I see people talking about Mario Wonder and stuff in chat and like other games and how mainstream it is. As an example of its mainstream appeal, on Wirecutter's social channels, one of the biggest videos that we ever did was my Mario Wonder preview.
Yeah, right.
So normal people respond to this stuff.
And in a way that like I don't know that there's that much else in gaming. I don't know. We talk about Fortnite, you talk about Marvel Rivals, you talk about all these different games that are big, and sure, those games can get very large. But in terms of just like, even from people who may never play them, they do respond to that sort of stuff at the mainstream level in a way that they never would to, I think, Marvel Rivals is probably my example there. But
there's not a lot of video gaming monoculture left.
Right.
And Nintendo stuff is like maybe some of the only video gaming monoculture left.
Yeah. It's weird to think how, I mean, I guess that's true of every medium, really. But
like Disney stuff,
yeah,
as close as you're going to get. Some Marvel stuff, like Nintendo stuff, is like, there's really just not very much that is like uniformly resonant as Nintendo stuff.
Yeah, so I don't think they have anything to worry about, really. There's been hand wringing. I've gotten emails into the podcast and other places of going like, I think the Switch 2 is on shaky ground. I don't think it's guaranteed. I'm not saying it's going to fail, but I worry about it, that it's not innovative enough and not this enough, and just like it's going to play the games that people want at that mainstream level. They seem like they have become very smart about what that audience wants. And like, yeah, they're maybe not going to make you a new Kid Icarus ever. And maybe it's still a miracle that they are going to make another Metroid Prime someday, maybe.
Well, I mean, there's a new Metroid Prime about to come out that will be an awfully good-looking cross-platform game on Switch 2.
Right. But then, it seems like that they've become very smart and very locked in about the things that they know sell well to that mainstream audience, the Mario Karts of the world, and, Animal Crossing to a certain extent, that I think that they will just be smart about it.
Also,
and knock it out of the park at that level.
There will be a Marvel Rivals port on that machine within the first 6 weeks of it launching.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's gonna be. I don't know. Like I'm just excited to kind of get on the other side of it. Like I hope that this is the week, just because I'm tired of having like these kind of non-conversations about it with people. Um, I know it sounds like, between, I was gonna say the Game Awards, but I think even further back than that, I know everyone's just been having more and more open conversations about it.
Yeah.
At events like that for some time now. So I think it's time to just be done with it and get the information out there so we can start figuring out like, okay, what's shipping when,
Yeah.
what's
As
it
soon as
what's it actually going to do.
as soon as they opened up, like they started taking meetings with indie pubs, I
Yeah.
think is when like stuff really started to snowball.
Yeah.
And also like apparently there are just like fully functional versions of it floating around in China now. So
Whoops.
yeah.
Yeah, just like people just like stealing one part off the line at a time and then assembling it in a basement somewhere.
Yeah.
Um,
Like
yeah,
selling access.
right. It's been funny seeing that's felt way more like iPhone stuff
100%.
than gaming stuff. Like the way that these leaks have been happening, the way they've been coming
Also,
from case manufacturers, like it's very iPhone coded.
the original Switch leaked quite a bit like this.
Yeah, I was trying to find. I couldn't find it initially, but I didn't spend a lot of time. Remember the fake like football shaped
Yes.
one that people were throwing around for a while? That was a weird one because I had been told very directly what the Switch was without, from some, I could not report it, but it was just like, okay, like I know what this thing is. And so seeing that and going like, oh, that actually totally fits the bill of everything I know that this is going to be. I did spend a couple of days there going like, I think this might be it, because
It was made by somebody who like had either decent information or a real good guess. I'm seeing some people in chat talk about emulation. My other prediction is that this will be significantly harder to crack security wise.
Well, yeah, I mean the thing that led people to get into the initial Switch was just a backdoor left in that NVIDIA chip.
Yeah.
That NVIDIA, I'm sure, had to make good on with Nintendo in some way for fucking that up. And so yeah, presumably you won't be able to use like a piece of tin foil or whatever to get this. The one thing I did think is, and I'm sure that they will change and upgrade the encryption on the games themselves, but if they don't change the slot at all, the one thing I started thinking was like, well, I wonder if you'll be able to take a Switch 2 cart, jam it into a hacked Switch, and because that thing is wide open, use that to eventually decrypt the carts and dump them and do all that sort of stuff. And then I realized like I should stop thinking about this.
Yeah.
Because if they're going to be backwards compatible, then you're going to have at least a very similar cartridge slot. Maybe they do a notch like they did with Game Boy Color or something.
The notch just doesn't work anymore, but it would be funny if it were there.
Yeah. Right. But I wonder if they, because of that, they're going to have to do quite a bit of work to the cartridges themselves to prevent people from dumping those.
Yeah.
I
don't know. It is possible to make a secure console. Like Xbox has managed it a couple of times now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Like all of the Xbox hacks have all been around like Brazilian shops swapping hard drives and like all kinds of weird stuff that I don't even know if that works anymore, but I know in the early days that's what they were doing. And yeah, I don't know. The joke was always like, well, people don't care enough about the Xbox to hack it, but also them having developer mode and having the ability to just swap it over made it a much less appealing target, because anyone who wanted to monkey around with an Xbox could just pay the $20 to open it up and do weird stuff with it. And so they weren't incentivized to make piracy a reality.
I have one more really important Switch 2 question, then we can move on if you want to.
Okay, sure.
What do you think the cartridges are going to taste like?
I think that they'll taste exactly the same. I think that's been
it's just iterative foul.
Yes, it'll be like maybe a little bit more foul.
Slightly stronger, slightly longer lasting.
Oh man, it was like well, I don't know if you've ever put battery acid in your mouth, but it was similar
I've touched
to
my
that.
tongue to a battery, like a 9-volt.
Mm-hmm.
Can't say I put battery acid on my tongue though.
I thought it was maple syrup. Because it was leaking out of a drum machine that I had on a kitchen table, and when I picked it up, there was a sticky surface under it, and I was like, "Is this what?" And I was like, "Oh man, did I just get syrup all over my drum machine?" And so I went like this, and like, oh, and like, no, the batteries in my drum machine were leaking, and you find that out the hard way sometimes.
Every word of that story gave me another question.
Okay.
And I don't think I want to know the answers.
Fair enough. It was a long time ago. If that helps.
A year? 2 years?
Yeah, 18 months, something like that. No, okay. I was probably 17.
That answers some of those questions
or something. Okay. Yeah, so
that's
it was,
fair.
It was a very long time ago.
Touche.
Kind of in connection to this, Windows Central has been reporting on a lot of stuff around Microsoft's plans for multi-platform development, which I feel like that stuff is in, full swing these days. They specifically mentioned both Halo Master Chief Collection and Flight Sim 24 as being games that are being targeted for the Switch 2. But presumably, I mean, that's the sort of thing that presumably a lot more would come than just those, even if they just retooled Sea of Thieves, or if Hi-Fi Rush ends up making it to the Switch 2 or whatever. Like it just feels like everything will in some form, but those are the ones that are being specifically mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I assume in part that the Xbox timing is to maybe announce a couple things for the Switch 2.
Yeah, because they've got their developer thing. Was that the 23rd?
It's like a week later.
Yeah. So that would be a decent time for them to maybe make some announcements on yes, January 23rd. And Windows Central is also trying to predict some of that stuff. They're saying, so they're listing 4 games here. Doom: The Dark Ages, which the Doom social media accounts have been out there saying, hey, you should watch this. So I think it's definitely a given that Doom will show up there. South of Midnight and Claire Obscure Expedition 33. The Windows Central article also goes on to say there's also a mysterious 4th game, and I won't spoil what it is, but our sources indicate that it is a new entry in a legendary Japanese IP which has decades of history and should make a lot of fans happy.
I mean, I have my guess as to what that is.
What do you think it is?
I think it's Persona 6.
Okay.
Metaphor came out. Persona has been rumored to be in development for a really long time. Atlus and Sega have a really good relationship with Xbox.
Yeah, I think that's a good fit. I Sega was my first kind of go-to, or like the Sega Atlus conglomerate in terms of like where would this game likely be coming from.
Apparently, a new Echo the Dolphin name was trademarked last month, so that's a dark horse for it.
If that is what Windows Central is billing as a game with
legendary
decades of history, then that'll be very disappointing. Ninja Gaiden potentially.
They just announced that 2D Ninja Gaiden at Game Awards, that side-scrolling one. So that seems to me like more of like feelers to figure out if they should greenlight a Ninja Gaiden project. A Dragon Quest game has already been announced.
Yeah,
I like Yakuza has a game about to come out.
I think that's why I kind of went to Sega.
Yeah,
because I think that they are on that kick of revitalizing some of their old IPs. That's clearly something that they very much want to do. The classic relationship of Sega and Xbox is maybe coloring my judgment here a little bit, even though that doesn't exist in this day and age the same way.
I've seen some people suggest near in chat. I saw some speculation about that as well. Like it's possible.
Sure,
like a new Year game.
Yeah, I think Persona 6 is a good guess. I think Ninja Gaiden is I'm going to say that's my kind of dark horse.
I would be happier about that, honestly, if it wasn't made by the same people who made 3.
Sure, yeah. But also, I think that like, would a Crazy Taxi or something like this count here, even though they've already kind of announced that?
I think that's already been announced.
Yeah.
But again, like we're relying on the phrasing of a website who is often very well sourced, but also phrases their stuff to get maximum anger clicks all the time.
Yes.
So,
maybe best to not dig too deep into the specific language there, but
we're going to know in like 9 days. 9 days.
I bet we'll know before then, but yes. 9 days at the most.
Also, supposedly a bunch of Final Fantasy stuff might happen there.
Okay.
Like Final Fantasy VII Remake announced, Final Fantasy 16 announced, Rebirth announced.
That's cool. I think until that stuff is day and date, I don't know. Like I know that it feels like they're chasing, like that's the best they can do currently with the way things are, and fans want that stuff to come to Xbox, but they'd want it sooner. And so when they say a year later, like, hey, we're getting Final Fantasy, it feels like Microsoft is expecting some groundswell of like, oh yeah, and like it doesn't materialize because people are like, yeah, okay, game's a year and a half old.
If those things come to Xbox in the next year and a half, I would be surprised if the last Final Fantasy VII Remake release didn't simul launch on Xbox and PC with PlayStation. And I think that's just like
they've been almost tipping their hand at that, as saying like, hey, it's too expensive to make these things and not sell them everywhere. So
Square has to learn this lesson like every 17, 18 years, I feel like.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm glad they caught up. I would like their games to sell.
Yeah. I think the last bit of kind of Windows related news does kind of go back to some of what we were talking about with improving Windows for some of these handhelds. That was kind of the last little bit of CES stuff. Jason Ronald, the vice president of next generation for Microsoft, which is that's a title, I guess. That's such a weird, it feels so out of place for the current era of Microsoft and Xbox for them to have kind of an almost jokey, fun title. Like it just feels like Seamus Blackley era Xbox poking its head through.
It's kind of like fan virtue signaling, right? Like,
yeah,
it's happening, guy. We've got this guy.
Yeah. Look at this man's beard. You can trust him.
But Jason Ronald is like a long time Xbox dude.
Yes,
and like was like one of the main hardware people behind the Series X, which is a great console.
Yeah. But basically, I think he kind of put to he made it official, because I think there's been a lot of talk about this without Microsoft really getting out and acknowledging that, like, hey, Windows is really fucking bad at running on these handhelds, at running in these kind of console like scenarios, or that you can't just expect to launch regular ass Windows on a device with no mouse or keyboard and have a good time getting to and launching your games. And so this is him kind of confirming and saying like, hey, the quote here that The Verge has is, we've been really innovating for a long time in the console space. And as we partner across the industry, it's really about how do we bring these innovations that we've incubated and developed in the console space and bring them to PC and to bring them into the handheld gaming space. And there's been some talk, that this is maybe even taking the form, and you saw what looked like a new version of the game bar.
Yeah.
I think there's also been some discussion about a full-on like game mode or something that they're striving towards that will not only be more navigable with a gamepad, but may also kind of shut down some of Windows non-essential components, which has always been a really dicey proposition. Every time everyone said, like, you've got to put it into game mode to get more performance, like that's never been real. But
do we need that, or do we just need a front end you can navigate with a controller that's stable?
I think you just, if it launches into that. So goal wise, I'm sure they would much rather have that be something that is completely seamless and in the background and something you never really have to think about, as opposed to like, hey, you've got to boot into this or whatever. It sounds like that, as they work their way through it, it may not be as seamless as they want it to be right now. I think it's the thing that's going to keep these handhelds from ever cracking through into the mainstream is going to be that experience. It's going to be, it's the thing that I think that Steam OS has as a main advantage right now is when you turn that thing on, you can figure out how to get to where you need to go. Steam OS is maybe not the smoothest, like there's still work they could do, I think, in terms of how you get around. But I think a version of Windows that is very focused on gaming, obviously I think they would have to, it can't just be focused on Xbox's store and Xbox's, like if they made something that was just like, here you go, all your Game Pass games, and ignored Steam, then that's DOA. That's pointless. They're wasting their time. But if they can figure out a way to get you into these experiences whether it's launching Steam in big picture for you, or even just bypassing that to launch games directly or something. I don't see a downside to
I
that.
I think Steam as a platform has a problem in front of it that like I don't see like a lot of the game press talking about, because they exist in this bubble outside of it, which is that
Mm.
like maybe one or two of the most popular games on earth work on that platform, and like the biggest games on earth do not.
Sure.
Like League of Legends doesn't function, Valorant doesn't function, Fortnite doesn't function.
Right.
And that is just an enormous part of the PC gaming market,
Mhm.
like by itself. And the nature of those systems and cheating in Steam and Linux means that they just may not ever,
Right.
you know,
Or,
unless
it would take the install base growing to a place where those games feel they have to support Linux more directly.
I
And
just don't know if it's possible to lock Linux down
sure.
that way.
Yeah.
Because we're at a point where people are like using like something to intercept DMA stuff from one
Yep.
PC on another to cheat. Like once you
Yeah.
get to that, like you've got to lock something down.
Right.
The funny thing is that like there is precedent at Microsoft to make an OS like this, which would be Windows Media Center. Like
Now you're talking.
Windows Media Center like skipped all of the Windows bullshit and went straight into a very console like media front end. I have a
Right.
cat meowing. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's coming through the mic.
Yeah. It's fine.
And like it worked with a controller. Like
Mhm.
there was like Windows Media Center for 360, and I was maybe one of like 5 people that used it. So I think that there is the potential there to do something. I also, I, these different companies all put a bunch of shit on their laptops
Yeah.
also that isn't good at doing the things that they're trying to do. So it's not like it's just a handheld problem.
Right.
But I I think Xbox as a platform has specific problems that are not just like handheld related, but like PC ecosystem versus Xbox ecosystem related. And until they say how they're going to solve those things, there are too many unanswered questions.
Right. I think it's real easy to just kind of hop, skip, and jump through some of this stuff and go, oh, well, clearly the next Xbox will be something that takes advantage of this because it will just be a PC and it will just be this, or, it's not quite that simple. But
Yeah.
I do think when you look at all of the marketing around this is an Xbox and their attempt to turn the Xbox term into something that represents their platform instead of a specific device, it's easy to start to want to connect those dots and go, okay, clearly they'll do this for the handheld machines. They will do it for, some of the other platforms that they want to have Xbox like experiences. And by the time they get around to launching a new console, it will also just be a PC like device that leverages this stuff. And maybe they lock it down. Maybe they lock it down so you cannot run full fledged Windows on it. And it is, like the S version of Windows. You can only use their app store or something.
Yeah, I mean, for a gaming console at a certain point, I just don't know why you would want to run Windows. Although
Right.
I got to be honest, there are certain things that like the Ally does, as an example, that like the Steam Deck doesn't, that I'm like grateful for, like Windows Hello,
Sure.
hilariously,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
waking it up, like it has all of my payment information in every PC marketplace on that console, and being able to unlock that stuff with a fingerprint is
Mhm.
convenient. I Yeah, I mean, there's like stuff that the Xbox already does that suggests they should be able to do this.
Yeah.
But it's a question of resources, and like, does Microsoft actually consider it a priority?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. I feel like the amount of lip service they've been paying to it and the amount of time they've been spending talking about handhelds, whether it's them making their own or the existing market for that stuff, they have to do something, because I think they've spent too much time talking about it now to then go like, oh, well, it's not a priority, or hey, we're, yes, we care about it, but the Windows team is busy with, trying to figure out how to get people to install Windows 11. And so, we're on the back burner. Like it's something that they have to be able to prioritize. Otherwise, I think that they've spent way too much time talking about it already.
yeah, But also, and they've just like laid so many breadcrumbs, and I think Indiana Jones is kind of like the most recent example of that, with like the Xbox stuff built into the PC version that I
Yep.
didn't even notice the first time I
Mhm.
played it. But like, the fact that it's seamless and that it works on Steam, but also hooks directly into all the Xbox services, including for my saved games.
Yeah.
Like, I think that is, that is a sign of where they want to go. And also, like, when do we see an Xbox overlay on a PlayStation 5 port of an Xbox game?
Right.
Like,
Um,
because if PlayStation is forcing overlays in all of their stuff, then why wouldn't you just have Xbox achievements on the PlayStation version of something? Like when Indiana Jones comes to PlayStation, will you get Xbox achievements for it? Will my Xbox save be available on that platform?
right.
Like, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah. I would wonder if on the Sony side of things they would say absolutely not. Well, well, whatever. Uplay has had achievements. I
Yeah.
guess like there's already precedent because Ubisoft has had their own busted weird achievement system.
How much of a fuck you do you want to send to the people that own Call of Duty?
As I mean, as big a one as possible, I guess. I don't
Especially
know.
when like the FCC is about to change hands and Microsoft donated $1 million fucking Trump's inauguration. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
PlayStation is a Japanese company in a suddenly much more jingoistic regulatory environment. So like, things are complicated, and also Sony gets money every time they sell a game. So
Right. Yeah. There's kind of no reason to. Well, there's a lot of legacy reasons to stop that sort of stuff, but I think in the modern environment there are not nearly as many good reasons to do so. Speaking of Ubisoft, they kind of came out the other end. Well, I don't know. This is a never-ending process for them, but they issued a strategic update about their strategy, which involves them pushing Assassin's Creed back another month, and also a lot of language in here about. We have made good progress on the strategic and execution reviews initiated a few months ago, and are confident that this will position Ubisoft for a stronger future. We've taken decisive steps to reshape the group in order to deliver best-in-class player experiences, enhance operational efficiency, and maximize value creation. It sounds like they're working with continuing to work with external advisors. With it sounds like them getting ready to figure out a way to either take the company private or sell it or both. And they held a conference call alongside this that didn't really, give too much more information. But it just, I don't know, man. Like they also note that fiscal year 24-25 net bookings are now expected at around 300 million euros, primarily reflecting lower than expected holiday sales, mainly for Star Wars Outlaws, as well as the discontinuation of X Defiant, which the amount of times they're trying to throw X Defiant on the under the bus on its way out is funny, because there's no way they could have expected that game reasonably to contribute.
but they did, which is why they killed
Well,
it.
yeah, I guess that's okay. So, yeah, so I guess that's why they need to undergo a strategic review, because if they're looking at that game and going, this is gonna, then there's a real rotten problem at the core of that company.
I first, just as an aside, like, if you want to understand why ZeniMax got acquired or why Activision got acquired, there, but for the grace of God, go a lot of the bigger publishers in this current environment. Like, Ubisoft is the cautionary tale.
Right.
Um,
And
I
I don't know. It doesn't feel like any of this is them getting any closer to figuring out what they need to do on a game front, but they do try to throw in. I mean, they keep using the terms "best in class player experiences" throughout this, as if that this is something that is going to fix their games, as opposed to like a core problem that they have had years where they have spent trying to fix it and haven't. And nothing about what they're saying sounds dramatically different now. It's just hard for me to believe that, unless they are, when they say reshape the group, if they are really tossing out the editorial team, like so many parts of the Ubisoft structure that has led to the last 5 to 7 years of their output, it's hard for me to believe that anything dramatic changes here. And I don't even think there's anything dramatically wrong with Star Wars Outlaws. I don't know what they did wrong there. I suspect that they don't know what they did wrong there.
I think one of Outlaw's initial biggest problems was the fact that the PS5 version ran badly and buggily, and that's what they sent to people for review.
Bad word of mouth. I ended up with PC.
Same
for review on that
because I wanted to play it on a handheld.
Yeah. And so I had separate issues on PC for sure early on. Yeah, definitely some questionable word of mouth out of the gate on the technical end of that, but I feel like so many other games don't see a huge hit because of early technical issues or those things that get corrected at such a decent pace that it just, I don't know, it's
so
hard.
Let's look at perspective for a second, which is like Outlaws sold like 1 million copies in a month.
Yeah.
And that's not good enough.
Right. Yes.
So, we have to remember what Ubisoft needs out of things versus like how that affects what is something doing well.
Sure. Right. Yes. That's true.
So, I don't know.
Yeah, I was guess, and so around the Assassin's Creed delay, the language they're using there is it has been decided, as part of the renewed focus on gameplay quality and engaging day one experiences, it has been decided to provide an additional month of development to Assassin's Creed Shadows. This additional time will allow the team to better incorporate the player feedback gathered over the last 3 months and help create the best conditions for launch by continuing to engage closely with the increasingly positive Assassin's Creed community.
That's a curious phrasing.
It's a really weird, I imagine that's in place to try to show because this is all investor relations focused stuff. They're trying to say people are coming around on it. Which I don't know. I feel like the only negativity I've seen around Shadows has been from like chuds and weirdos. And yeah, it's just like, which in today's environment, maybe that plays an outsized role. But at the same time, the past 3 months of player feedback for a game that isn't out, I don't know how much player testing they've been doing. They don't allude to that here. This doesn't sound like, they didn't run a beta. They're not like, oh, we had feedback from the beta that we're incorporating. It's just, we're better incorporating the player feedback gathered over the past 3 months.
I am sure that the second that reviews and player reactions to Outlaws happened, like they like slammed this thing back into player feedback sessions.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Especially for onboarding stuff. Like they're like, oh God, like we need a reality check. We need a sanity check like right now.
Yeah.
On how this game is going. I am sure that this has been through like another wave of evals, like of consulting stuff in the last 2 months. And one of the feedback things is probably like this game better not have any bugs because it got delayed.
Right.
Like there are a lot of good reasons for it to get delayed, honestly. Like I know that it's a punchline, but it's good that it got delayed.
Yes, I'm sure the team would certainly agree with you on that.
But also February is bananas.
Yes.
Like why would you, if you could delay it, like if investors would let you delay it?
Yeah, it's not missing the quarter. It's March 20th now, so.
Or rather, like you can try to tell people that it's going to be successful and try to make deals based on it being successful and wait till the last possible second to give it the best chance of success, or the last possible second for them to know it won't succeed. Like for business and development reasons, like a March release date for this game makes way more sense than February did.
Yeah.
And a month can make a difference. Like 6 weeks can make a big difference. Like one of my favorite official making of things on YouTube is the God of War documentary that Sony put out. And there's a part in there where they're like stressing about getting like 6 weeks.
Right.
Like in that, like how relieved everyone at the studio is to get like 6 extra weeks and how big a difference that makes to them.
Right.
So, don't discount like what a month can do for a game.
I think it's more that like I just question how valuable the feedback would have been over the past 3 months, but I guess that is plenty of time for them to rush a lot of players through there and do a lot of either focus test style sessions or, like you said, do another round of consultancy stuff, which these consultants, I don't know, I can't trust them.
Monster Hunter Wilds is end of February, chat. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think happens to Ubisoft at this point? You know, this strategic update that they've listed is them lowering the numbers again. Obviously, there's been all the talk about them trying to figure out what to do with this company. It's unless they are, you know, and we know that they like to splash out big at a platform launch. So who knows?
So
maybe they've got like 5 Switch 2 games that they know are going to turn things around for them, and they're just like, we're going to get there. We just got to string people along until we can announce Rayman. I don't know.
Strategy 1 is putting a bunch of stuff on Switch 2 like as quickly as they can, and the rumors that I've seen is they have like 6 Switch 2 games like in the pipe. And so, you know, like Assassin's Creed Mirage, I'm sure they'd love to put Assassin's Creed Shadows on it. I just don't think that they're there yet with that. You know,
it would take a lot of work for them to get there.
So put stuff that didn't take a big margin to port on the Switch 2. Hope for like those launch sales, which they've had good luck with before. Hope that Shadows does well. Lay off more people. Like, and they don't want to close studios in a lot of the places where they are, because stuff like Skull and Bones has always been like a tax abatement strategy. They opened a studio in Singapore for tax breaks. They had to make a game in Singapore to keep those tax breaks, so they made Skull and Bones there, and it became like a chain around their neck. But you know, they need to make more games. I don't think that you get any way around it without saying that they have to make more games.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, they'll do their batch of games for the Switch too, for sure. But yeah, it feels like people are not as interested in what I think people view as the classic IPs of Ubisoft anymore. Like, they felt like they had a really good run there with stuff like Far Cry, and it just feels like the sentiment for that stuff has taken a real dive. Not that Far Cry was ever like the biggest game in the world or anything, but like even in that context.
Was Far Cry 6 2022?
Oh, I think that sounds right.
And it had been delayed, right?
Yes. 2021.
Was
October 2021 for Far Cry 6. Yeah.
Yeah. And it had been delayed. So like, I don't know, they're just taking, they have the same problem that a lot of companies have. They're taking too long to make games. They're not making decisions in an efficient way. Also, their graphics, you know, too good.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, it's they've just been such a weird, not an outlier, because like you said, I think a lot of the larger publishers are in different forms of this malaise. I think just a company like EA hides it better because they have perennial sports stuff that I think can really help them out in a bind.
If Ubisoft had Madden, FIFA, and you know, their shooter, whose name escapes me suddenly for some reason, Apex.
Battlefield. Oh, Apex. Sure.
No, Battlefield is Battlefield. You know, they have Apex, Madden, and FIFA, or not FIFA, EA Sports FC.
Yeah.
So that keeps the lights on there. But
yeah,
Ubisoft doesn't have anything like that.
Yeah, it's hard to see how they would even get something like that, as much as it maybe makes you understand why they keep trying with something like, whether it's X-Defiant or Hyperscape, when they were chasing after the Battle Royale thing more directly. Like, watching them trend chase over some of these things over the years, you start to understand, like, okay, they just don't have anything. I just want a new Division at this point. If they just made a really good Division 3.
They've canceled so many games.
Yeah, like, they did.
And you know, like, they pivot games and they cancel games, and it's just like every example of game development dysfunction is just so present in Ubisoft. And I think that, you know, they used to make a ton of games, and not every bet had to be the biggest bet, and now every bet has to be huge. Like, I don't know. It
would be nice to see, and I think it's a harder problem, like that, you know, like whatever. We could talk for another 3 hours about this, and maybe someday we will, but just that idea of like, how do you get these companies to back down and start placing smaller bets, more smaller bets, instead of always trying to place the biggest bet imaginable, and then having to deal with the fallout from that when that game doesn't hit.
I mean, in this case, by going private
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like basically going semi-private and having like another shareholder come in and buy up everything else. Like if
Right.
Tencent has like 47% and the Guillemets have 53%, then
Yeah.
theoretically that's how they don't have to respond to shareholders demanding that they do certain things, but they also have the capital available to start to make games.
Right. Yeah. Sony's got a new patent, according to gamesindustry.biz. This is okay. They're looking to harness AI. This is gamesindustry.biz's language here. Designed to harness AI to help predict player behavior. This idea here is around like reducing latency by predicting player movement. Like, okay, it's likely that if you're walking down this road, you're going to keep walking down this road, and so we're going to start rendering that next frame because we assume you're going to keep doing this. It sounds like QuakeWorld. It sounds like that they just looked at what John Carmack did decades ago, because that was the whole thing. Like, QuakeWorld was designed to play online Quake on dial-up modems, and so what he came up with was a lot of predictive technology around that basic thing. Like, okay, if you're walking down this hall, you're probably going to keep walking down this hall. You're probably not going to turn around, and if you do, we can catch up and figure it out. But it almost sounds something like that, like trying to predict player behavior and kind of get ahead of it to kind of reduce latency in those sorts of scenarios.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I see some people in chat saying this is pre-caching, and it is, but it's also, I think that the idea is to use machine learning to get really good at predicting what people are going to say or going to do.
It's not quite something like emulation. Some emulators have started to get into what they call run ahead technology, where they start running 5 different versions of the emulator in the background that are frames ahead of you, so that they can just shoot to that instance faster than they can render the input in your main instance. And it's a fascinating technology that the overhead on it is ridiculous for anything, emulating anything of note.
This is part of what netcode does now. It's just it's not as advanced, and there aren't as many scenarios calculated, but this is like one of the things the machine learning is good at, is like calculating a lot of potential permutations of an action. So cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting application of the technology, if nothing else. Let's see here. That's pretty much it for the news. Power Wash Simulator said that they're killing off their VR support in a message that I thought was kind of interesting.
But not laying anybody off.
No, they are taking those people who were working on the VR stuff and deploying them on other projects. They put out a statement from the CEO saying, "I'm so sorry to let you know we won't be continuing support of Power Wash Simulator VR. We absolutely love and believe in VR, but this doesn't mean we won't support it in the future, but we aren't able to continue with support right now. We've been faced with a crossroads. We have a truly excellent and kind VR team who were working on a platform which costs us more than it makes, while also having a list of job openings that were looking to be filled on other projects. We took the decision to redeploy our VR team into those other projects." And so it goes on from there a little bit, but I think that makes a ton of sense given where things are these days. And it's interesting to see someone just kind of come out and say like, yeah, man, our VR thing it was costing way more money than it was bringing in. I think makes a lot of sense right now.
I mean, I guess I'm surprised it took them this long to get to it, but I'm glad that it didn't kill the studio.
Right. Yeah. I mean, left unchecked. That's the sort of thing that could, I guess. That's going to do it for the news. Podcast@guard.bike is the email address. We don't have a ton of time here, but
sorry.
We do. No, I mean, there was just so much. I mean, so much to go over. It's been great to have you on to talk about that stuff. Let me see if I can pick out a couple of emails here. Let's see. This is a weird one. Maybe I shouldn't. Whatever. Nokia fanboy writes in to say Deadlock will be canceled. You played any Deadlock?
But just a tiny bit. But
Yeah.
I'm really excited to hear how this email goes.
All right. Well, I'll read it. Deadlock sucks. Is Valve done making good games? Artifact was bland and boring. Deadlock was bland and boring. And I have to say, I didn't think of much of Alex's gameplay either. Mostly warping around looking for ammo, gel, and solving basic boring puzzles. The last game I liked from Valve was Portal 2, and it felt like their last truly amazing AAA work. Everything else since then has felt very B tier. I do not see much love for Deadlock either when talking to random people. A guy sent me an invite on Steam and told me it was bad, and that everyone had moved on to Marvel Rivals already. I think it's time for Valve to just focus on Steam and hardware and simply license out their IP like they did with CSGO. It's an interesting take that I don't know matches up with, like, I think the talk around Deadlock has cooled from where it was when it was kind of first breaking loose, but that also seems very natural for a game that people were dying to talk about, and now they can, so they did.
Also, it's still in beta.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the player numbers still seem pretty high.
It's definitely tapered off from like the player numbers that they had again when there was that groundswell of information about it, but I think, I don't know. I feel like everyone, and I have not had a conversation about Deadlock in a while, but I have multiple people on my friends list that have hundreds of hours in Deadlock.
An
already.
unfinished game with a bunch of placeholder shit isn't doing as well as like
Marvel
a game
Rival, yeah.
that is effectively ripping off one of the most popular games of all time with a canonical but a bit of lore that is like the most successful entertainment IP of all time.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah. I would not be surprised that, yes, I'm sure some of the Deadlock player base has gone to check out Marvel Rivals for a while, but also Deadlock, the idea that Deadlock has a player base for a game that is still in some kind of closed beta is crazy.
I mean, look, I wasn't like super jazzed about Half-Life Alyx, and I thought Portal 2 was really good.
Yeah.
And maybe like the best thing that Valve has done campaign-wise in a long time. That's not the weirdest thing.
Sure. Yeah. It's not like 100% off base. I mean, I Artifact was not for me, and it turned out it wasn't for most people. But like, I respected the attempt. Like, it seemed like they went into that project intelligently and got the right people that would try to make them a card game. Like, it felt like a valiant attempt, if nothing else.
It was a bad business model, honestly.
Yeah. And yeah, Half-Life Alyx, I think at the time it came out, I just didn't have the hardware or the space. I mean, I still kind of don't. But like, Half-Life Alyx was like their attempt to just like, hey, we're going to make a full-on VR game, and there are plenty of people that just aren't equipped to do that. I mean, in the years since, it's not like VR has blown up and become this big thing. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, not super surprising there, but I don't know. This is the maybe the first truly negative thing I've seen about Deadlock. So it seems like the people who like that are the sort of people who would like that type of game, being like an action MOBA kind of thing, have been having a really good time with it. And they aren't necessarily spending much time talking about it anymore because that embargo was lifted months ago now. But I reinstalled it just to kind of get a sense for the updates and stuff. And yeah, I mean, they're still issuing large updates. Like December had big patches and all this other stuff that they're doing. So I don't know. The game feels very much like it is still in flux. And I suspect it will do just fine by the time it comes out.
If there's any liability that Steam and Valve have this year, it's increased scrutiny of Counter-Strike 2 skins and gambling.
Yes. Yeah.
It is not Deadlock, because Deadlock is probably being designed and worked on by about 60 people, whereas Marvel Rivals is, I'm almost positive, being developed by at least 1,000.
Man, yeah.
So they don't like. Marvel Rivals has to be big. Deadlock does not have that kind of obligation on its shoulders.
Yeah, and it probably never will. I mean, they'll.
No.
Yeah.
Like Dota is huge, but never League of Legends huge. But Dota still makes a fucking enormous amount of money. So
right. Yeah, and Deadlock, I would say, seems at least poised to be able to do that sort of thing. I mean, there's no monetization in it at all right now, but you think you just extrapolate from what they've done with Dota and how they've
And
handled
Counter
Dota
Strike.
and Counter Strike, yes,
Yeah.
and you look at it and go like, okay, yeah, this
Yeah.
could be the next big one of those from them in a genre that people seem excited about with where the game is at so far. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think it has to. I don't think it's going to be like the biggest game in the world, but also it definitely doesn't have to be. But it could very easily become like an esports sensation of sorts, where they, I don't know, maybe the international expands to include multiple games. I don't know. Let's see here. Gavin from the United Kingdom wants to know, can people who don't play games heavily make good games? He says, I have spent more time listening to people talk about games in the last decade than I have playing them. I like to keep up with games, and I played games a lot before my 20s. I even studied game development briefly with two old Lionhead developers as tutors at university. I occasionally play mechanics hook indie games these days, and I have fleeting ideas, which I think is cool. And so it leads me to these general questions. Do you think that people who don't play games heavily can make good games? And did you have any experience of people stopping playing games but still being involved in journalism or development, etc.? Yeah, I mean,
Let's see why not.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I think you see a lot more of in, depending on the discipline that you're talking about. Like there are plenty of artists that are just happy making art, and they may not play a ton of games. They may not be super in tune with how their art gets used in the game. And I think there are maybe is a case to be made that, an artist that is very much in tune with how their art's going to be used might be better suited for it. But I have met plenty of people over the years that have been involved in parts of the game development process, whether it's the marketing end or just the directly working on art, assets, audio, all of these different disciplines that have not necessarily played a ton of games. I know plenty of like creative directors and heads of studios that don't play games the way they used to because they don't have time to. They're too busy making them.
Like, I don't think that the people I've talked to about Call of Duty are good at snaking.
Right.
You know? Like,
yeah.
I don't think Neil Druckmann is awesome at Counter Strike, or Amy Hennig plays like a ton of Halo or something. Well, maybe she does actually.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I have known plenty of people who have made fighting games who are not esports level good at their own game. I mean, that's a very normal thing. Doesn't mean they don't play it per se, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of stuff like that. In the journalism side, I'm trying to think, it's hard to be a game reviewer if you don't want to play games.
yeah, I think reviewing is tough if you're not like
Mm-hmm.
at least like adaptable.
Yeah.
Like I am decent at games and get decent quickly. Like that is what has saved me in reviewing
Yes.
games.
Yeah.
But I don't think you have to be awesome at games to write about them. I know lots of people who write about games who are bad at them.
Yeah. And especially, and again, I think the different disciplines there, like we've had people who ran news back at GameSpot that did not play games, but they were great at reporting and, financial reporting and different aspects of reporting that made it so they were able to report on damn near anything, and anything that was like way more nitty gritty on like, oh, you need to know specifics about the game. They would assign that story to someone else, and they were perfectly capable at doing that. Some of the best people I've worked with in the news side of things have not played games at all, in fact. And yeah, so I think that there's definitely cases to be made where that can happen, but it's not. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get very far reviewing games unless you are playing them.
Just logistically speaking.
Yeah. But yeah, all right, cool. Well, that's going to do it for the show. Arthur, thank you for joining me. People can find your work at on Rebel FM, of course, Wirecutter. Did you come out of CES with a lot to do for Wirecutter, or is it kind of like you're waiting for products to ship so that you can then figure out what you should be recommending? Like how does that process work?
We're going to start reviewing GPU stuff on Wirecutter, I think, so that will start soon. I think the Lenovo stuff will ship pretty soon for the handhelds, and
Yeah.
there's some other stuff I saw that I can't talk about yet that I will get soon.
Cool.
Mostly I'm writing what to look forward to's, warning
Hmm.
people about what's coming so they don't spend money without knowing the FOMO that could be awaiting them. So
Yeah. Nice. I have been using the upgrade pick for Wi-Fi routers from
nice.
Wirecutter for some time
Yeah.
now, and it was I think I say this every time, but it was always fun to work adjacent to a tech site and go into meetings and say things like, "Hey, I just bought whatever Wirecutter recommended." They loved it.
Yeah.
They loved
Wirecutter, we're great for things you don't want to think a lot about.
Exactly. It was perfect for a lot of that stuff for sure.
If something is a hobby or you like getting gremlin-y on it, Wirecutter maybe not for you, but for, air filters, microwaves.
Yes, the air filter has not steered me wrong. I did not look at it for a microwave because I just went to the store and just bought whatever they had because
They're
it's a
all
microwave.
the same.
Yeah,
They're all
exactly. All right. We'll be back next week with another episode of the podcast. Of course, I'll be around tomorrow doing some streaming of something. I don't know. Maybe I'll get some more Infinity Nikki suits or something.
Frame.
Yeah. Yes. Or maybe it'll probably just end up being more Warframe. You never know. More Warframe. All right. Be back next week. Thanks, everybody. And I'll see you.